It was hot in the arena that day. Two mixed martial arts fighters did not yield to each other's strength until one of them knocked out his opponent's jaw. The young man continued to beat his opponent until he was pulled away by the referee. He said that was enough as it was. The boy exclaimed that he was now the champion. The red-haired young man's name is Troy Chi. He is a professional mixed martial arts fighter. On that day, the entire population of the multi-million-dollar city was glued to the television screens. The morning news was broadcast. The announcer announced that their fighter Troy Chi had won the world title at a competition of fighters from around the world. Troy was pleased to see himself on the screen. The girl was happy to say that Troy Chi became the youngest ever wrestling champion and was awarded the title of the strongest man in the world. The announcer said that Troy was the pride of their country. Troy himself happily admitted that he was the strongest man in the world. The other news was already boring, and Troy lifted his gaze higher. Suddenly he saw something strange, and he was surprised. On the roof of a tall building of a famous coffee shop very close to the fence stood a girl dressed as a schoolgirl. The young man was very frightened. It was at least 30 meters high. Troy Chi shouted to the girl that it was very dangerous and she should leave the roof of the building. The girl said nothing. She was not going to move away from the low fence, which was up to her waist. Not everyone felt the way Troy did. A couple passing by immediately pulled out their phones, hoping to capture the moment of the suicide. Troy couldn't stand it and punched the guy in the jaw. He yelled that he should call the police instead of doing nothing. The girl ran over to her boyfriend's body and yelled that his phone had been taken. Troy glumly replied that he'd left his at home and needed to make an urgent call. The emergency operator instantly picked up the phone and asked what was wrong. Troy wanted to say that someone was trying to jump off the roof, but he didn't have time to finish the sentence. All this time, he had been carefully watching the schoolgirl and was surprised to see that the girl had broken the flimsy fence and was halfway to heaven. Flying down, the girl was screaming at the top of her voice. Troy told the cameraman that he was too late and the girl had already fallen off the roof. Suddenly, Troy realized with horror that the girl was no longer alive. The operator kept asking the caller what he wanted to say. Troy Chi tossed aside the phone that had become unnecessary. The operator was on the line, trying to find out what was going on. Troy didn't care. He was rushing as fast as he could to the place where the girl would fall. He had to save her. Troy got there just in time. He flew into the open parking lot just as the girl was saying goodbye to her life. The big shadow of the girl flying down was getting closer, and Troy ran even faster. He seemed to be running faster than the wind. Troy jumped onto the car and pushed off hard. He jumped as high as he could and put his arms out, trying to catch the stupid girl who had almost crashed. At the last second, the girl closed her eyes. Her eyelids were watering. Troy was surprised to recognize that she was very beautiful. A moment before the hug, Troy Chi still had time to wonder why the girl had gone to such a foolish act. He thought that she was in a state of intense grief. The inertia was too strong, and the girl and Troy slammed into the car, crushing it halfway with their bodies. Several people showed up at once. The driver of the crumpled yellow sports car was the most distraught. He cried out for help. Troy's head was shattered, and he was lying in a pool of his own blood on the hood. However, the guy didn't feel any pain at all, and thought it was the adrenaline. Bliss began to come to him, and his eyelids began to close. The young man thought that he had just begun to live, but it was already over. A conversation took place at the city's central hospital. The doctor urged Mr. He to wait a little longer. His daughter was not yet strong. Their voices woke the girl, and she slowly opened her eyes, looking around. It became clear that she was in the hospital. The doctor and her father continued to argue. Mr. He assured the doctor that he had thought it over, and it was far from a spontaneous decision. The girl in green pajamas started to slowly get out of bed. The Troy Chi in her body was glad to be alive. Getting out of bed, the young man realized that his body had changed. He had lost a lot of weight, and his skin was paler. He must have been in this hospital for a long time. Besides, he couldn't help feeling that he had gotten shorter. Troy thought of that girl. He figured they'd both survived. Thinking about how teenagers take everything to heart these days, Troy suddenly saw the same girl in the window. That girl shyly looked directly at him with a devoted gaze, and Troy decided to ask how she was feeling. Troy smiled and addressed the girl politely. The girl was very pretty, and he hoped to make friends with her after rehab. Troy faltered and gagged with the palm of his hand. A tear trickled down his cheek. For some unknown reason, his voice changed to a girl's. Suddenly, he saw that the girl in the window was also crying, holding her palm to her mouth. A terrible guess flashed through his brain. Troy Chi realized with horror that the cutie was now himself, and the window was not really a window, but an ordinary mirror. It seemed too incredible to be true, and Troy slowly walked over to the mirror and raised his hand. The reflection did the same. Troy just as slowly reached for the mirror, continuing to hope that this was all a prank, and he was about to touch the girl's hand. Unfortunately, his hand hit the cold mirror, and Troy Chi was seriously startled. He shouted indignantly that there was no such thing. Realizing that Troy Key was now in the body of a cutie, the young man panicked. After all, this meant the loss of his manhood. Troy never made it to his pants, though. His eyes strayed to a woman's breasts, and it all became clear to him. He shrieked in terror so loudly that the girl's piercing scream could have been heard by aliens if they were orbiting Earth. Mr. He took advantage of the opportune moment to rush into the room and asked his daughter Tori how she was feeling. But Tori was acting really weird. She was looking down her pajama pants and pretending that she must have male genitalia. The girl was in tears. Before the accident, Troy Chi was the strongest man in the world. But now he was the same Tori girl who had fallen off a building, and finding himself in her body was just awful. Troy Chi carefully checked his pants a few times, but he didn't find the object of his pride there. He would have to be Tori Hay for the time being. Her father drove her to school in a white car and promised to pick her up after school. Troy felt very silly in his schoolgirl clothes. Troy looked up sadly at the sky. He wished he could go back to that day and change everything so that they would both still be alive. Pensive, the girl walked all the way down the beautifully laid paving stones to the school. Troy realized that this was the place. Judging by the sign, Tori used to attend a high school sports school. Troy thought it wasn't a fun place to go to school. The girls nearby were discussing Tori, and Troy's ears perked up. The schoolgirls were discussing her suicide attempt among themselves. Everyone around them was pointing fingers at the girl and whispering that she had survived, but had killed a world champion, and so she should be ashamed. In the small alley, they recognized her too. One girl said angrily that Tori shouldn't have come to school at all. She replied that she had a memory lapse. Troy reached the end of the hallway and realized he was a little lost. He needed to get to Class A, and there was no one to ask. Troy suddenly realized that something wrong was going on. It was pretty strange. Being inside the walls of the school, he felt clearly threatened. At the same moment, the doors nearest to him flew off their hinges, followed by the young man whose body had kicked them open. Troy was almost speechless with fright. Pieces of wood and plaster flew into Tori's face. If he'd walked faster, things would have been different. Troy's legs were shaking, and it was hard for him to stand. He asked the green-haired boy fearfully what was wrong. The young man was breathing heavily and staring fiercely toward the doorway, spewing curses. Tori asked if he was all right. Suddenly, she realized that this guy with green hair didn't look like an ordinary young man from the sports school. His wrists were professionally bandaged. His white shirt had a patch on the chest indicating that he belonged to the martial arts section. The young man looked up glumly and was surprised to recognize Tori. He hadn't expected the girl to be released from the hospital so soon. Troy looked at the young man with Tori's eyes. Of course he couldn't know the guy and asked if they knew each other. Behind her back, someone said with a chuckle that Tori was now very famous and that she no longer recognized many people. Tori turned around in surprise. Judo Section Vice Captain Ox said he recognized her. She's the one who killed Troy Chi. The coach admitted that Tori was prettier in person than in pictures. Tori turned purple with rage. Troy was angry at the thought that he had died from the fall of this girl whose body he was in. Ox asked a green-haired Sonny if he wanted to avenge the killer for the death of his idol. Turns out Troy was a deity to Sonny. Every day he analyzes videos of Troy Key's fights and tries to imitate his movements. The young man exercises for a long time in the gym. Ox frowned, saying that the kid wants to start an MMA club and be the best in the school. He has absolutely no respect for the other wrestling sections. Sonny stated that they had all sorts of clubs at their school, and he had just created another one. Troy was pleased to meet an admirer of his talent. He added that the Ox was only clinging to him because his favorite lost the fight to Troy Key. Sonny promised that he would defeat the judo club. Troy thought Sonny was talking too much for an injured man. If he'd won, he'd have turned up his nose. Predictably, the Ox instantly boiled over and asked the student to repeat his threat again. The coach grabbed the young man by the throat with one hand. The iron grip slowly squeezed his neck tighter and tighter, and Sonny began to choke. Ox lifted him up and asked him to try to kill him. Tori demanded that he calm down. Ox nonchalantly ordered the girl to shut up. The trainer explained to a panting Sonny that their discipline was simply stealing techniques from other martial arts. At the same time, he spoke ill of Troy Key. The trainer didn't have time to finish his sentence. Tori's foot slammed into his jaw, and the huge Ox began to roll onto his side. Sonny didn't immediately realize what was happening, and was surprised to realize that the coach's strong hand had released him. The young man jumped to the floor. He eyed Tori suspiciously. The girl looked too fragile for a fighter. Yet she'd managed to take down such an elite master with a single blow. Tori took a powerful leap towards Ox and kicked him in the same spot with her heel. It happened very quickly, even by the coach's standards. She ran up to the defeated master, and Sonny moved fearfully back against the wall. It was clear that Tori was not to be argued with. Tori stopped beside the coach and menacingly asked what had happened to him. She assumed he hadn't gotten it right the first time. An indignant Tori shouted that the coach shouldn't have spoken so disparagingly about Master Troy Key, who was killed by someone else's body. For a moment, Sunny has a strange feeling that this girl is not Tori at all. She's acting too tough. The sports school for high school students occupied a huge area. All kinds of sports sections were housed under its roof. Tori was in the second grade program. A large sign on the wall pointed in the right direction, and she found Class A. The teacher talked about the advantage of the technique for a counterattack used when the opponent strikes the groin. As if remembering, the instructor said that girls were not concerned. They may not worry about attacks to this area. Tori listened to the lecture with an absent look. Troy thought it was pretty cool that he had a passive skill. Sunny sat behind the girl and watched her glumly. If someone had told him about the fight, he wouldn't have believed it. He remembered the blown-out doors and the fact that he was barely breathing. And his assailant lay defeated on the floor. With a single punch, Tori took down the vice captain, who weighs over 130 pounds. Then a surprised Sunny looked at Troy with all his eyes and could not understand anything. The girl asked him as if nothing had happened, if he was all right. Sunny looked very concerned and didn't say anything back to the girl. He seemed confused about something. Tori was wary. She didn't like the look on the young man's face. She didn't know what to expect from him. Vice Captain Ox just crept closer and tried to grab the girl. Sunny barely had time to warn Tori of the danger before she jumped up and the Ox missed. Sunny watched the girl with his mouth hanging open and marveled at her impeccable reflexes and lightning-fast movements. He barely had time to warn the girl before Tori instantly jumped up. It was as if she had twined in midair and hovered for a second. The vice captain, spewing curses, began to rise from the floor. Tori was immediately behind him, and Sunny was afraid of her reaction again. Troy Key regretted that this body lacked strength and needed to deal with that arrogant coach quickly. Vice Captain Oaks was furious. He had to admit that this wench could fight and was giving him some pretty sensitive blows. The master took a fighting stance and beckoned the girl to him. Tori didn't have to wait long. She was on him at once. Ox shouted that she was just a stupid schoolgirl, and there was no need to underestimate a great martial arts master like him. The master didn't manage to grab her. Somehow Tori had always been a second ahead of his actions, and now she just jumped up. She clamped the inside of her knee around the wizard's neck, and the Ox gasped in surprise. What's more, he couldn't break free. The master tried to punch Tori. She grabbed his wrist with one hand and used the other to grab his elbow joint. As a true fighter, versed in all the intricacies of mixed martial arts, Sunny immediately recognized the move the girl had used. This technique was called a flying cross grip, and at the moment the master was lying on his back and Tori was pressing on his elbow joint, and it was very painful. Moreover, it was as if she held him in a vice, and Vice Captain Oaks could not even move. He was ashamed that a schoolgirl had done it. Ox tried to jerk his arm free, but he couldn't. The girl was as strong as he was, and their hands were shaking with tension. Ox finally lost his temper and screamed that Tori was just messing with him. There was nothing he could do. With a powerful jerk, the trainer raised himself to one knee, resting his hand on the floor. Tori cried out, but she held on and didn't loosen her grip on his neck. Troy had to admit that the technique didn't work. He probably lacked his own weight or strength. The vice captain grinned gloatingly. He was now on his feet and had regained his strength and confidence in victory. The coach yelled that he was just going to smash the girl against the wall. He was very angry, having to deal with her for too long. Sunny was seriously afraid for the girl's health. He shouted that the foreman should stop immediately. This was no longer a joke. Tori looked calm. Troy had an advantage. Despite his frail body, he was well aware of the advantages of different techniques. This time she let go of Ox's arm but caught her hands around his neck, simultaneously hooking her leg around his stomach. Throwing her other leg over, Tori pressed herself against Ox's back, pinning his torso with her legs crosswise. At the same time, she applied a chokehold. Ox couldn't believe she had succeeded. He turned pale and assumed the girl behind him had performed a chokehold. Tori smirked and confirmed the coach's hunch. Nothing could save him, and the girl whispered in his ear that this was the end. At the same moment, Ox's face reddened with tension. He struggled to loosen his grip and yelled in a low voice. It was useless. Tori's exertion and pressure made his neck redden. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. The strength began to leave the coach, and he could no longer resist the obnoxious girl. His eyelids closed on their own. His hands slumped helplessly. It was a sign that the battle would soon be over. Ox was growing weaker. Tori could feel it. At last, the strength left the master. He could no longer stand on his feet. The trainer's knees began to shake, and he sank to the floor under his own weight. Despite this, the coach was not going to give up and tried to shake Tori off. But the girl clung with a dead grip and calmly waited. Ox swayed forward in exhaustion and fell face first to the floor. Tori jumped off her assailant just in time. She looked at the fallen coach without much hatred, seeing it simply as a nuisance to be overcome. Sunny looked at Tori in amazement. He knew that the two techniques the girl had experienced on the coach were not available to every person. So now, sitting in the classroom behind her, Sunny sat carelessly with his feet up on the desk. He couldn't figure out who this girl was. Troy Key irritably thought that in his current body, he had to mobilize all his strength because of some jerk. Troy twisted his wrist and recognized that compared to his muscular, trained body, it was harder to live in this body. He looked at Tori's frail arm, barely casting a shadow on the wall, and thought regretfully that his body was very weak. Troy clenched his fingers into a fist and tensed his hand as hard as he could. Tori's hand began to shake from the strain. To quiet the trembling, Troy propped his chin up with his fist and promised his mother that he wouldn't disappoint her, no matter what came his way. At this time, Ox lay staring dumbly at the blue sky. He was resolutely dumb and did not respond to his name. It wasn't until the coach was approached closer and called to him louder that the pupils of his eyes began to swivel in different directions. The Ox began to come back to life. The vice captain sat down on the floor with difficulty and shouted that he would never forget or forgive that strangulation of that little girl. The members of his club looked among themselves. A young man in a jacket asked about the strangulation, and another young man asked about the girl. The youngest of the group dared to voice that the vice captain had been strangled a bit by some underage girl, and the Ox turned purple. The man in the jacket was the first to fall under the hot hand, and the coach pulled him to him by the collar of his shirt. The young man was scared to death. Ox grabbed the second man by the shirt between the collar and the shoulder. He was rather large, but with Ox's own size, it didn't matter. The youngest one immediately realized that the smell of fried food was on him and rushed away with all his might. Unfortunately, that didn't save him. Ox grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and the young man shrieked with fear. The martial artist was so angry that within seconds, all three of them flew in the other direction with wild yells. Ox couldn't believe that he, while serving as vice captain of the judo club, could lose to some juvenile. He turned to the trio of men and shouted that they had better not tell anyone about this, especially the captain, or he would kill them. Lying gore on each other, the young men assured the coach that the captain would never know about it. He was still in Japan. Ox turned away and grinned gloatingly. He'd promised that little girl he'd show her who was stronger. Meanwhile, the whole sports school was living its own life, and nobody cared about Ox and his comrades. Troy Key hadn't quite gotten into Tori's character yet, so he stretched sweetly and yawned with his mouth full, not even trying to hide it. He was surprised to realize that the girls around him were judging Tori yawning in front of everyone, and even with her mouth open. The three girls stared at Tori and concluded that she had changed a lot. Tori asked who they were. The girl with pink hair said in surprise that Tori should remember her sisters. The girl replied that she didn't remember anything. The girl with glasses offered to get reacquainted. Her name is Julia, and she is a member of the Kyokushinkai Karate Club of the Rumble School. A girl named Winnie with fiery red hair has offered to help if needed. She's in a boxing club. Troy was surprised to realize that it was a martial arts school. Tori said it was cool to be in a fight club. A third girl explained that 2/3 of high school students are in fight clubs. The rest are members of sports teams. The girl with pink hair didn't want to talk about her past life. She said that now she just hated violence. The girl says she completely forgot to introduce herself. She represents their sister group, and Tori can call her Alice. Alice had a typical male physique and embossed muscles. Troy Key hoped he wouldn't become the same. Suddenly, Tori saw a stranger approaching their sister group and became wary. It was Sunny. He didn't say a word and looked at Tori in silence. All three girls couldn't understand what he wanted here. Tori turned pale and asked why he had come. Sunny looked at her glumly and walked toward her with a quick step. The young man looked into Tori's eyes and took a long look but found nothing suspicious. He demanded to come with him. Without waiting for the girl's consent, he grabbed her wrist firmly. Tori couldn't even move her hand. Sunny ran away from the classroom, dragging Tori behind him. She angrily called out to him and asked him what he wanted. The girls watched with interest. As far as Yulia knew, the two were not dating. They walked down the street, and Tori asked indignantly what was going on and where Sunny was dragging her. She promised that the young man would be sorry if he didn't let her go immediately. Sunny muttered to himself that there was no one here, which was good for him. Troy was surprised to realize that Sunny had a firm enough grip on his arm that he couldn't break free. Finally, Sunny let go of the girl's hand. He apologized and explained that he just wanted to know how Tori had managed to beat Ox and why she was acting like a completely different person. Sunny looked the girl in the eyes. He wanted to ask why her fighting techniques were so similar to Troy Key's, but he didn't have time. Troy realized that Sunny knew everything, and yelled that all these questions were unnecessary. A furious Tori slammed her fist into the young man's jaw. Trying to justify her actions, Tori yelled that Sunny had grabbed her arm too hard and she was in a lot of pain and hurt. Because Sunny was holding Tori's hand tenaciously, she had red marks all over her wrist. Sunny was surprised to say that this straight punch was the same. He got up from the ground. Without turning to look at the girl, Sunny exclaimed, his doubts now gone. The young man shouted that Tori was Troy Key. He quickly turned around and tried to hit her, but Tori dodged perplexedly. The girl looked at Sunny in amazement. Troy hadn't expected to be exposed so quickly. It wasn't what he'd planned. Sunny tried to hit the girl again and wailed that Troy Key was in her body. Troy had no problem walking away from the blow. Tori asked her to stop talking nonsense. Sunny shouted that in any other case, she simply wouldn't have been able to beat the ox. Attempting to kick Tori's leg in a U-turn, the young man asked how she managed to repeat all those special Troy Chi techniques back then. Tori stepped back and explained that Troy had saved her life, and she had done the research and learned everything on her own. Sunny yelled that he didn't believe her. Troy Key was already regretting that he had interfered then. Because of the fight with the trainer, he had been exposed on the first day, and now he should stay in the shadows. Sunny adopted a fighting stance and warned that Tori wouldn't get away with it, even if she wouldn't admit it to him. The girl looked at him mockingly. Tori smiled and suggested he try it himself. Troy was delighted. It was much more interesting than the lessons at school. Sunny didn't need to be invited a second time, and he immediately rushed to the attack with a menacing shout. He swung, but Tori dodged. However, Troy himself was forced to admit that Sunny is quite a promising fighter and not an easy fighter to fight. During the battle, Troy developed one rather strange feeling. He could evade his opponent's blows very easily. Although Tori's body was not endowed with strength or skills, it had quite fast reaction and perception. As soon as Sunny swung, Tori already knew where he was trying to hit. The girl probably had great potential for learning martial arts. Troy wondered how Tori would be able to take the blow. He didn't move away from the blow and only put up a block, which Sunny took advantage of. His direct blow hit the bend of her elbow, and the intense pain brought tears to Tori's eyes. Without the block, though, she'd be in heaven by now. Troy was surprised that the girl's body was so weak. Tori was almost howling from the intense pain. Tori was in so much pain that she couldn't stand it and screamed. Her screams were heard by the whole sports school. Tori now looked like a normal schoolgirl. She whimpered, holding her injured arm. Sunny felt guilty and asked if everything was all right. An outraged Tori asked in tears as he thought to himself. After all, Sunny can't even imagine how hard he hit the girl. Sunny looked at the girl in surprise. He felt ashamed of himself. For a second, he even believed she was just a girl. The young man looked at Tori in a completely different way now. Her face was wrinkled with intense pain, and she seemed very beautiful to Sunny. Sunny frowned in embarrassment and was about to apologize to Tori for hurting her. But he was a little too late. Someone's white sneaker slammed into his jaw, and a surprised Sunny started to fall to the ground before he could finish his sentence. It turned out that some man in a black suit had witnessed the conflict and decided to intervene. Tori looked at him in surprise. The blow was hard enough to send Sunny flying several meters away, his back hitting the ground. He groaned, spreading his arms. The young man shouted menacingly to Sunny that no one dared to offend the girl, and the young man was not worthy of being spoken well of. The man screamed that he would never forgive Sunny for the act. Troy got the feeling that Tori had known the young man before his death. He panicked and began to speculate who they had been to each other in their past lives and what had bonded them. The young man stood over Sunny and told him off. He asked how it had even occurred to him to hit the girl. The man had a badge on his jacket too, with the emblem of their sports school on it. He told Sunny glumly that he should be ashamed of himself. Sunny pretended not to hear the man, and the man stepped closer and yelled for the young man to get up off the ground immediately. Troy stared in amazement at the defeated enemy. The savior called softly to the girl and asked if she was all right. Troy was stunned. He didn't want to talk to people of his own sex while in Tori's body. Tori sobbed and said she was fine. She just didn't expect it to hurt that much. She wondered what the savior's name was. The young man looked carefully at Tori, and their eyes met. He suddenly realized that this girl was very beautiful. A man said he heard about her. The girl had been in an accident and lost her memory. Tori smiled. That was about right. The young man said sadly that he had assumed that, and was sad to hear about it. Tori realized from the characteristic ending of the sentence that he was Korean. The man raised his head and introduced himself. His name is Jun Kim, and he is the captain of the Taekwondo club. The young man inquired about the girl's name. The girl almost said her real name, but she stammered and said her name was Tori. Kim liked that name, and he came closer. He apologized for not getting to Tori sooner, and that rude young man had already managed to hurt the girl. Jun Kim suddenly wrapped his arms around Tori and tried to pull her close, hoping she wouldn't mind bestowing a kiss on her savior. Troy was amazed. It was out of line. So the embarrassed Tori shrieked indignantly. Jun Kim pulled the girl even closer, and their faces were very close. He asked, accepting his apology. Tori blushed even more. The young man closed his eyes and almost kissed the girl, apologizing in Korean. Troy was just outraged. He hadn't signed up for this. He angrily motioned the Korean with his fist. Tori looked aggressive. At the same time, Sunny elbowed Kim in the back of the head and demanded that he get away from her. It was as if Jun didn't feel the blow. Without turning around, he said he remembered the young man. He was the same Sunny Yang who founded the MMA club. Squinting his eyes towards the young man, Jun Kim squinted unkindly and said that it was excellent and he was happy to meet them. He immediately told Tori that it wasn't safe to be here. Without turning around, he did a vertical twine and hit the unsuspecting Sunny. Sunny flew to the ground again. He groaned heavily. There were fresh abrasions on his cheek and near the bridge of his nose. Troy Key was astonished. Even by his standards, Jun Kim moved very fast and it was hard to keep track of his movements. It hurt a lot, and Sunny clung to the bruised spot, barely able to keep from roaring. He groaned. Jun Kim continued to insult Sunny's ego and stated that the guy was too weak for a fighter. He looked at his opponent and wondered how Sunny even dared to start his own fight club at Rumble High School. Jun mockingly suggested that his fighting style was only good enough to meet girls and flirt with them. He managed to hurt Sunny. The young man got angry and yelled that Jun shouldn't have called him a weakling. He lunged at the Korean, yelling on the way that he was going to beat him himself. But his fist cleaved the air. Jun stepped back and said softly that Sunny was too slow. Sunny got even more angry and frowned. He yelled that Jun Kim thought his punches were slow for nothing. Sunny exclaimed that he might as well speed up just for him. He threw his arm out again to strike, but Jun Kim ducked in time. Troy stood back and watched the young men squabble. It was strange to him that Sunny was attacking everything that moved. The moment Jun Kim dodged another punch, the bell rang and the Korean said it was time to go to class. Sunny snidely assumed he was just trying to avoid payback and tried to reach his fist into his torso. Jun Kim kicked him in the head so hard that Sunny's eyes almost popped out of his head in surprise. Jun said he was in a hurry to get to class. Sunny fell to the ground face down and didn't move. Jun told his opponent that he had to go. He would play with the young man next time. Troy Key was surprised to realize that Sunny Yang couldn't beat anyone and was only ruining the reputation of fighting without rules. Jun Kim turned to the girl and politely said goodbye to her. Tori blushed with embarrassment. Troy just didn't have the words. June said goodbye that she could find him at the Taekwondo club. He decided that Tori was already fascinated by his beauty. Jun Kim turned around and walked away, humming a song to himself. He was already imagining the future of his relationship with Tori. Troy looked at Sunny, who continued to lay on the ground, and thought that June had made a real mess of the place. There was nothing else to do, so Troy went back to his class. Tori was told that there were 9 major fight clubs. Yulia named them according to the established order. The girl specified that there were other combat disciplines, but they were much weaker. Julia said that Tori had just been with Taekwondo club captain Jun Kim. Tori recognized that he was an incredible fighter. Yulia added that Kim is good at more than just that. He is also very handsome and belongs to a rich family. Alice turned away and contemptuously asked what was so great about this guy. Winnie replied that Julia was just crazy about Jun Kim. Alyssa said it's ridiculous for a man to wear makeup base and eyeliner and she just hates guys like that. Troy Key thought it would be a good idea for Alice herself to look in the mirror and see who she had turned into. Suddenly someone said that nobody really cares about Taekwondo, and this kind of martial art is just for show. Tori turned around in surprise. Sunny Yan, with a bandaged head, tried to say that one day he would be the strongest. Tori turned away contemptuously. She asked Yulia what order the girl was talking about. It turned out that there was a ranking, which was tied to fights between the students themselves. Julia reported that no one trusts the system, and they use underground fights. Captains of all clubs fight for the coveted title of the strongest among them. Tori asked in surprise which coveted title Julia was talking about. The girl said in her heart that Tori really didn't remember anything. The girls began to banter amongst themselves, and Tori exclaimed angrily that they should treat the girl who had lost her memory better. It turned out that the first-place student was going to the annual youth championship tournament. The winner of the tournament would be recognized as the world champion. The fighters of the Rumble School are so strong that every year one of them took the title of champion. Therefore, the number 1 in the school is equal to the world champion. Troy was quite surprised. Number 1 in school meant that you became number 1 in the world. He liked that. Alice said that the whole thing seemed strange. Tori is too suspicious of fight clubs and their rules. She used to hate violence. Troy didn't know what to say. Tori explained that she just didn't remember anything, so she was curious. Alice replied glumly that amnesia had nothing to do with it. She had changed completely. Tori used to be a quiet girl who hated violence, but now she was completely different. Alice moved closer to Tori and looked suspiciously into her eyes, as if trying to find answers to her questions there. Alice frowned and asked Tori if it was somehow related to the transmigration of souls. Tori countered that there was no such thing. Sunny Yan followed the girls. He vowed that he would win the title of the best in Rumble High School. Tori frowned at the young man. Troy thought he could compete at the world level if he managed to get first place in school. He decided he was going to get the world championship back. The three girlfriends saw Tori and Sunny talking cheerfully. Winnie suggested that there was no amnesia. She had just gone crazy. Finally, the school day came to an end, and the happy students ran out into the hallway in droves. Joyful shouts announced that lessons were over. Troy was the only one sitting tiredly at his desk. He wasn't happy about the idea of having to study all the way through high school again. But there was another equally important circumstance. Troy remembered that he hadn't gone to the bathroom all day. Tori struggled to hold on a little longer. Troy realized he couldn't take it anymore. He had no intention of going to the women's restroom at all and was setting himself up to hurry up and pack up and go home. Sunny approached her and scowled that the girl hadn't explained her connection to Troy. The girl angrily shouted that she was his mom if Sunny would make it okay. Suddenly, someone called out to Sunny and the girl. The voice was clearly not friendly, and they were both wary. Vice Captain Ox and his entourage were coming up the stairs. Ox suggested that his abusers talk to the judo club. Sunny assumed that Tori was tired and postponed the conversation until tomorrow. Tori angrily stated that he was scared and didn't want to admit it. When the pursuers came to the floor, Ox saw only the back of some strange schoolboy. From afar, his head looked like a pineapple. Ox shouted after him to see if the pineapple-headed Sunny had seen him. The boy clamped his nose to change his voice and squeaked that he hadn't. Ox stopped at the door to the classroom and shouted the young man's name loudly. No one responded, and the coach opened the door to the room. The classroom was completely empty, and one of the men told Ox so. The coach replied fiercely that they were leaving too quickly. Ox smirked gloatingly and said that those two wouldn't get rid of him so quickly. He'd find them tomorrow and pay for everything. He called loudly to his men and they left. Tori was clinging to the railing on the balcony, hiding from her pursuers. Her bladder couldn't take it anymore. Mr. He's white car was parked outside the school. Most of the students had already scattered, but Tori was still nowhere to be seen. The man pushed back his sleeve and glanced nervously at his watch. Tori used to get out of school much faster and not make herself wait. At that moment, Tori jumped into the car, threw her backpack on the seat, and shouted for her father to drive faster. The man's glasses slid down his nose in surprise. Her father suggested celebrating her rehab over dinner. Tori was all for it and yelled that she didn't mind, only she really needed to go home. Their house was quite large and spacious. The house was quite large and spacious, and everything was full of greenery and flowers, and there was a large fountain nearby. As soon as Tori entered the house, she ran in a sprint, holding her lower abdomen. She screamed that she couldn't take it anymore. Mr. Hay finally understood what was tormenting his daughter so much and wondered why Tori didn't go to the bathroom at school. He thought sadly that Tori wasn't quite ready for society yet, and she should just be given time to get everything back. Troy almost burned with embarrassment trying to handle his new body. He couldn't handle his bladder like he used to. Moreover, there was a completely different sensation in this body, and it seemed very strange to the blushing Troy. Troy Key could barely cope with the routine of going to the toilet. It was a serious challenge for him. Her father was already sitting in the living room and immediately turned around as soon as Tori appeared in the hallway. He said it was okay to go if the girl was ready. Troy regarded the interior of the house with mixed feelings. He tried to understand more about the girl whose place he had taken. There was a mountain of unwashed dishes in the kitchen, and for as long as Troy could remember in this body, the man had never eaten at home, and everything in the house was scattered all over the place. It turns out that my father didn't help out around the house, and Tori did all the housework alone. A picture of her mother was prominently displayed, and Troy assumed that Hay had no intention of looking for another woman. They arrived at the very same clinic, and Mr. He, after the appointment, thanked the doctor fervently for the consultation. The doctor replied that he had not done anything special. In parting, the doctor advised to show Tori things she knew well. It would help her get her memory back. The man assured her that he would do his best. The doctor looked at the girl and said that Tori seemed more energetic now with the new hairstyle. The father said that was a good thing. In fact, the new hairstyle was done by a nurse. The doctor asked if Tori had a boyfriend. Her father replied that she was too young. Troy, meanwhile, was leafing through a magazine with the latest news. A whole page was devoted to his life and the funeral. Troy was thinking about the funeral parlor. Since the funeral had taken place, he would never be able to get his body back again. He almost sobbed, guessing that his body had been cremated. Mr. Hay asked Tori if she was okay. Tori could barely keep from crying. Troy begged the heavens that none of this was true. He didn't want to be a girl forever. Tori said she had a favor to ask and asked her father to take her to a place. He asked where to go. After a while, the daughter and her father arrived at the columbarium, and Mr. Hay thought it would be best to leave Tori alone. Troy saw his picture with a small text praising his personal best. He couldn't help but roar. Her father ran in and started comforting Tori that it wasn't her fault what happened. In fact, Troy was roaring because they had chosen a bad photo. Now Troy had no choice. He was forced to accept Tori's life. The young man hoped to feel needed in this family. The hardest thing to believe was that their fates turned out to be similar. Tori had also lost her mother. She was smiling sadly in the last photo. One day, the door of the house opened, and Mr. He said in surprise to the person who entered that he was to return in a few years. Since Tori, due to her memory loss, didn't understand who it was, Mr. He said that her older brother had come home and they should be introduced to each other. Troy froze in place. A tall young man stood in front of him. He explained that he had to come back a little early after what had happened. The young man appeared to be about the same age as Troy. Her father told Tori that her brother's name was Kane. Troy realized that the situation was getting complicated. Until that moment, he hadn't realized that Tori had a brother. Besides, he looked overconfident. Tori's whole family went to dinner to celebrate her return to life. The prices were reasonable, so all the tables were taken. My father and brother were enjoying the food. Troy felt very hungry and was happy to cut off a solid piece of meat. The meat was delicious, and Troy decided not to save it for later. He took the last piece into his mouth with pleasure. There were fat chicken legs on the table, and the girl grabbed a bigger carcass, looking greedily at the rest. As she was finishing her meal, Tori said that she really liked the place and would definitely come here more than once. Suddenly, she noticed that her brother and father were looking at her strangely. The girl was surprised and asked what was wrong. Dad was just enjoying the taste of a fine red wine. He smiled and said it was fine. Kane looked at Tori suspiciously. Troy Key was greedily eating the chicken carcass, and assumed that his relatives just hadn't watched the eating process before. Kane didn't take his eyes off his sister. He shifted his gaze to his father in surprise, as if interested in his opinion. Mr. He took a sip of wine and discreetly turned to his daughter, then just as mentally replied to Kane that he didn't understand anything himself. Troy was so hungry that he didn't give the chicken legs a chance. All the plates on the table were empty, and Tori sighed in relief. She cheerfully said she was full and added that girls should have smaller stomachs. Her father offered to order more. Kane warily asked what her phrase about girls' stomachs meant. Tori said she needed to go to the bathroom right away. Father and son looked at Tori in puzzlement. She was acting very strangely for a schoolgirl. Kane couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. He surprisingly suggested that Tori hadn't eaten since she had been discharged from the hospital. His father replied that his sister's appetite had grown tremendously. Kane reminded her that she'd eaten very little before, but now she was devouring food at the speed of a vacuum cleaner. Her father replied that Tori couldn't remember anything because of her amnesia. Kane disagreed with that. One could remember absolutely nothing and still possess basic manners of behavior. Kane frowned and said it looked more like a personality disorder than amnesia that way. Kane thought about it and said that they should take Tori to the United States. He knew a psychologist there who might be able to help. His father replied that Kane shouldn't worry about Tori at all. Kane instantly perked up and asked what his father's plan was. The man replied that Tori was perfectly happy right now, and it was best to keep it that way. Kane assumed that she didn't know anything yet. Father lowered his head. Kane became furious and shouted that she had a right to know about it, and he dared not hide the truth. The man said softly that at the moment, Tori didn't remember that this family was foster care for her, and that's what he'd wanted before. He said he was asking Kane to do him a small favor. Let it stay that way, and then everyone would be happy. Kane thought it made sense. If Tori thought of him as a real brother, they could be a complete family. His moral principles opposed his personal motivations, and Kane clenched his fists so hard in a fit of anger that his fingers turned white. Kane sat with his eyes closed, pondering how ethical it would be to remain silent in their case. His father noticed his hesitation. He asked his son if Kane thought his actions were selfish. Kane replied that he did. Nevertheless, he understands his father's feelings. Kane suggested that Tori might find out about it herself. The man took another sip of wine and said mysteriously that Kane could care less. She wouldn't find out anything. Meanwhile, Tori herself went to the restroom, just as she had told her family members. She found it quickly enough by the sign under the ceiling. Having finished all the necessary business, Troy walked over to the wash basin and washed his hands thoroughly. Kane was an interesting person. Troy couldn't believe he was already the CEO at that age. He didn't notice that he had entered the men's room. Troy recalled that Kane had shown no sympathy or interest in his sister's affairs after such a horrible incident. He walked over to the hand dryer, thinking that he would fight with a brother like that every day. There were two guys standing by the urinals, looking at the girl in surprise. Troy squinted his eyes. It occurred to him that Kane was actually his brother now, and a family showdown was imminent. He caught himself thinking about things that weren't worthy of his attention. Troy was just about to leave when someone came into the restroom. Troy was thinking hard, and so didn't notice Kane, who was 2 heads taller than Tori. The girl hit his torso with her head and yelped in pain. Tori was the first to reprimand him and tell him to be careful. Troy was once again convinced that this body was sensitive to pain. Kane asked Tori in surprise what she was doing here. The girl only now realized that she had run into her brother. Kane was startled by her rudeness. Holding on to the bruised spot on her head, Tori perplexedly reminded Kane that she had spoken of her intention to go to the bathroom. It was as if Troy Key was only now paying attention to those two guys who were looking at the girl strangely. And yes, Kane had come here as well. Troy gripped his head in horror. Of course, he shouldn't have gone to the men's room in this body. Troy had completely forgotten that. Kane wasn't going anywhere and frowned at his sister. Troy Key frantically thought of a logical explanation that would convince Kane. Tori blushed with embarrassment and said confusedly that she didn't understand how it could have happened. She must have been distracted. Kane sullenly asked her to leave the men's room quickly. Besides, it wasn't appropriate for a girl to say such rude words. The dinner was finished and the He family returned to their luxurious mansion in the evening. It wasn't very late, and many couples were strolling around the city. Troy lay on the bed, tossing his stockings to the floor, and stared into the mirror he held in front of him. He liked the reflection a lot. Tori was a beauty, and Troy thought he could stare at that sweet face all day long. He remembered Kane's words about Tori's rudeness. He'd said then that Tori shouldn't do that, and it looked disgusting. Troy said angrily that he didn't see anything wrong. If he had a little sister like that, he'd just spoil her. But there was something else. Kane was acting pretty weird for Tori's older brother, and Troy couldn't understand what he meant. As Tori was on her way out of the bathroom, she heard Kane apologize to her. Troy thought he'd misheard her. Tori turned around and saw that Kane had his back to her. He seemed to be apologizing under his breath, mumbling that it was all his fault. Tori questioned Kane in surprise, but it was as if he didn't hear his sister and continued walking deep into the restroom. The girl gave him a surprised look and went on her way. When Kane returned, no one had brought up the conversation. Troy sat up on the bed. He was now absolutely certain that Kane was apologizing to him at that moment. More specifically, to Tori. Troy wondered what had made Kane apologize to his sister. There was genuine remorse in his voice then. Kane was aware of his guilt. Troy thought that Kane might have had something to do with Tori jumping off the roof in an attempt to kill herself. Besides, Troy had a strange feeling that not everything in this family was as simple as it seemed at first glance. The room he was in now was too neat. Not a single thing of Tori's was here. Besides, all the other rooms were untidy. Suddenly, there was a loud knock and someone demanded the door open. Troy could tell by the sound of his voice that it was Kane. Kane stood on the doorstep, naked to the waist. The towel around his neck dripped water down his muscular torso. Tori asked what the reason for his late visit was. Kane answered the question with a question and asked if Tori was going to sleep. Tori asked if there would be a snack at night. Kane replied that their family didn't eat at night. Tori wondered why he had come. Kane didn't say anything and looked at his sister silently, hoping she'd get the hint. Tori was silent too. Kane stepped closer, taking her hair gently in his palm and sniffing it. Tori blushed with embarrassment. It was too much for her brother. The girl squealed and jumped aside. Tori scrambled into a corner and shouted that Kane was too much. Her outburst didn't puzzle Kane in the least. He said softly that his father had been right about her. Tori got angry and yelled that he was making it up. Kane raised his head and stared intently into Tori's eyes. This went on for several seconds. The young man exclaimed that the girl was not Tori. Troy was dumbfounded. He'd been exposed again. Tori blushed and wondered how Kane had found out. Turns out his sister Tori was a germaphobe and bathed every day, and the new Tori hadn't been in the bathroom since she got out of the hospital. Troy understood and assured Kane that he was going to take a shower right away and went into the bathroom. Kane yelled for Tori to hurry up. Opening the faucet, Troy regretfully thought that he'd never had a girlfriend because he'd been dedicated to martial arts since he was a kid. He began unbuttoning his tie with the thought that he was facing an opponent several times stronger than himself. As Troy began to undo the buttons of his school blouse, he caught himself thinking that his heart was pounding more and more frequently. Troy started to take off his blouse, and the sensations were making him blush more and more. He was terribly nervous, and he didn't even want to look at that body. Troy's hand slid to her skirt. He decided that he would make this very quick. He would just rinse quickly, and that would be the end of it. His skirt flew to the floor, and Troy thought he should be careful with mirrors. He decided to just close his eyes, just in case. The bra proved to be the hardest part. Troy remembered that the nurse had zipped it easily, and he didn't understand why he couldn't handle it. After a little fiddling, Troy unclipped the clasp. It was going well so far. He could feel himself blushing more and more. After sorting out his underwear, Troy breathed a sigh of relief. His ordeal was only beginning, however. With his eyes closed, it was hard to orient himself in the space, and he stumbled back and forth between marble tiles and the dryer. Troy realized he wasn't going to get anywhere that way, so he decided to take one look. He squinted his eyes. As luck would have it, there was a mirror in front of him. He saw Tori's naked body and his heart failed. His blood vessels burst and a nosebleed opened. Troy screamed in horror so hard that he could be heard outside the house. He hadn't expected to see himself like this at all. Meanwhile, Kane took advantage of Tori going to the bathroom and unceremoniously went through her things. He turned on her computer and flipped through her notebooks. There was a lot to think about. Tori's handwriting had changed. She also began to doodle and scribble in her notebook. A weakened Tori finally came out of the bathroom, wiping her head. She asked Kane to call the hospital. She needed a half-liter of type I blood. Suddenly, the girl noticed Kane sitting at her desk and wondered what he needed here. Kane stood up and turned toward the door. He told Tori that she should rest. The girl backed away from the door so her brother could pass. But for some reason, Kane didn't leave and continued to stare at her. His gaze was a little thoughtful. He didn't say anything this time either. Tori blushed, starting to realize where he was looking, and asked if Kane needed anything else. Kane frowned and squeezed through the door. Without turning around, he mumbled that he didn't need anything and said goodnight. Troy decided he was just crazy. When he was alone in the room, Troy flopped down on the bed and threw off his slippers. He was very tired, and he promised himself he would wash every day. Besides, he was much more comfortable now. With his bra off, Troy felt as if he'd been released from prison and felt much better. He couldn't imagine how Kane was feeling right now. It was a huge effort to pull himself together and feign indifference. Kane frowned, regretting that this wasn't working out the way he'd wanted it to. He'd expected to just rebuke his sister. The next day, Tori arrived at the sports school for high school students. Alice spent a long time fixing her hair, and Tori asked unhappily if it would be much longer. Alice asked her not to rush her. She was doing a good job. Alice tied Tori's braid, fastened it with a rubber band, and said she was done. Admiring Tori, Alice said Tori looks good with any hairstyle. Yulia said she was just a cutie. She added that you still need a good stylist like Alice to reach your potential. The girl thanked Julia. The girls sat down at the table, and Alice asked the others who else had their hair done. Everyone shook their hands, and Troy realized that Alice was very popular. Yulia said that Alice is just an awesome stylist. Winnie added that absolutely all the girls adore her. She said that with her short hair there was nothing to make up. Tori quietly noted that Vinny looked more masculine than Alice. Julia giggled and said they should switch bodies. Winnie frowned and said that was impossible. Troy was the only one who knew that it happened. Julia stood up and said they had to go. Tori asked in surprise where they had to go. Winnie replied that they wouldn't go to PE in this one. Winnie immediately turned around. Julia offered to remind the surprised Tori where the locker room was. Of course, Troy didn't know where the women's locker room was. A confused Tori exclaimed that she didn't remember anything at all. The door to the women's locker room had threatening signs indicating that males were not allowed to enter. Tori walked into the locker room. There was a large, comfortable bench. One of the girls was sitting on it and taking off her stockings. Another girl in a single blouse walked past Tori and went over to one of the clothes lockers. She started to open it, blushing with embarrassment. Troy thought that from this point of view, being a girl wasn't so bad. There were a lot of beautiful girls here. Besides, it was much nicer and cleaner than the men's locker room. Completely oblivious, Tori stood in the middle of the locker room with her clothes on. Troy thought back to all the locker rooms he'd been in before. Every one of them had a horrible odor, and this locker room didn't even compare. He stood in the middle of the locker room, eyes closed with bliss. It was unexpectedly clean and cozy for a locker room. Winnie said that Tori looked creepy. Julia asked her to stop fooling around and hurry up and change. Tori glumly agreed. Opening Tori's locker, Troy thought the girls were right. He should get used to this body as soon as possible. Taking off his jacket, Troy watched Tori's girlfriends out of the corner of his eye. Every day he understood their personalities more and more. For example, Winnie has a militant look, but she's very cute. And if she grew her hair out, she'd be an incredible beauty. Julia usually wears a jacket and hides her narrow waist. Her glasses constantly make her seem very hard to please. Unbuttoning his blouse, Troy wondered which of the two girls he would prefer. He liked each of them differently. Troy decided that wasn't the problem right now anyway. He didn't notice that both girlfriends were staring at Tori's body. One of the girls exclaimed that the rest of us should look at it. Troy looked at the girls in surprise. Turns out it was all about Tori's body. All the girls clustered around her in a semicircle, looking enviously at her breasts. In a month, Tori's breast size had increased significantly. Julia said that you could quickly see if there was silicone in there. Winnie immediately flew into the crowd and said she would look into it herself. Winnie unceremoniously groped Tori's breasts, apologizing to her in advance. Tori screamed, ashamed of being groped. Julia inquired about the results of the study. Winnie confusedly said that they were soft and felt like the real thing. Tori blushed. This new feeling was very strange to Troy, and he didn't know how to deal with it. Tori immediately turned the other way and yelled on the fly that Winnie should stop it if she was done. Winnie and Julia looked at each other. They said to each other in unison that it sounded like a challenge. They giggled gloatingly. All the girls in the locker room were smiling very strangely too, and Troy knew right away that it wasn't good. Tori stood at her locker, covering her breasts with her t-shirt. Her classmates were looming over her, and Troy realized that the girls weren't cute at all. They abused poor Tori any way they wanted, and the girls' screams could be heard far beyond the sports complex. The sports complex was huge. In addition to the soccer field, there was a tennis court and a basketball court. Winnie said that Tori shouldn't have made those noises. It turned them on even more. Julia was surprised that Tori didn't even resist. Troy couldn't listen to them anymore. It just pissed him off that the strongest man in the world was being pinned down by a group of petty girls. He screamed as hard as he could and ran faster than Tori's girlfriends. At that moment, he himself wanted to die quickly. Julia noticed that Tori had become much more energetic. Winnie said that she used to be too modest. Winnie smiled. She liked the fact that the excellent and modest girl had decided to compete with her in the race. She shouted after Tori that she was accepting her challenge and rushed after her, actively helping herself with her arms. The surprised Julia was far behind. Winnie overtook Tori rather quickly and mockingly shouted that the girl was running too slow. Tori was surprised. Troy couldn't stand that Winnie had recently groped Tori's body like she wanted to, and now she was also trying to trample her pride. Troy frowned and decided to get back at Vinny. He thought it would be a good excuse to test the stamina of Tori's body. Tori picked up her pace and shouted to Winnie that she should come back immediately. Winnie began to run faster too. Tori wasn't like herself this time. She wasn't even going to keep up with Winnie, and the girl appreciated it. Troy thought that Tori's body speed wasn't bad, but his stamina was nowhere near as good. In a fighting tournament, he would have been exhausted long ago. Without yielding to each other, the girls sprinted to the finish line. The coach couldn't understand why they were running so fast. Tori's body was rushing forward, and Winnie couldn't catch up with her friend, even though she was moving in short jumps. Troy smiled smugly. He'd been able to rub the nose of that snooty Winnie after all. He was too dizzy from success to see anything around him. Suddenly, Tori's white sneaker caught on a small pebble and the girl lost her balance. Troy began to fall. He realized there was nothing he could do, and he was going to get hurt because his body was too fragile. A cry of horror escaped Tori's lips. She had gained too much speed and was flying face down. Winnie ran after her in surprise. Tori fell to the ground and cried out in pain. Winnie was at her side and asked her how she was feeling. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries, but professional help was needed, and the girl was taken to the medical center. Tori moaned in pain every now and then during the washing of the wound, and the doctor reassured the girl that he was almost done with her abrasion. He let the girls go, and Winnie asked Tori why he had tried so hard. It turned out that Julia would be interested to know that too. Troy had to admit that Tori's body wasn't bad, and with his skills and experience, it wouldn't be too hard to become a skilled fighter. But at the same time, a small abrasion knocked him out of commission. Fear of pain is unacceptable for a fighter, and must be overcome. Otherwise, he simply won't be able to defeat even a few opponents and become a master, let alone a championship title. The girls walked up to the gym. Winnie said it was a boys' class. Yulia assumed Alice was in here somewhere. Yulia found the girl at once. Alice asked in surprise what they needed here. Tori stood aside. Julia started to say that Tori had hurt her leg. Alice didn't listen to her until the end and asked Tori how she was feeling. She rushed over to Tori and hugged her. Alice was really worried about Tori. She knew that the girl was afraid of pain. Troy was surprised to realize that Alice knew Tori quite well. Suddenly, Tori saw a threat off to the side and gasped. The basketball players with the ball were coming straight at the group of girls. The ball that Sunny shot flew straight at Tori, and he warned them. Alice scooped Tori up in her arms in a flash and jumped aside. Both basketball players fell to the floor. Tori hiccuped in fright. Julia said the ball flew pretty close. Alice put her arm around Tori's shoulders and asked if she was okay. Stammering, Tori said she was fine. Troy never ceased to be amazed by this girl. Alice had her back to Sunny at the moment of the blow, but she still had time to react and save Tori. Alice angrily asked the basketball players what was going on. You could just as easily hurt someone. Sunny nonchalantly replied that he had gotten carried away and hadn't seen anyone. Julia whispered to Winnie that Sunny had done it on purpose. She had been watching him. Tori stared at Sunny, and he took notice. In fact, Troy envied him that even after the fight, the young man looked as good as new. Thinking hard, Tori said, "That's just amazing." Troy was surprised. He realized that the male body was much better, it recovered faster. Sunny was even a little embarrassed by Tori's stare. He was convinced that the girl was totally into him. Sunny smirked and said it was no big deal. He started basketball back in middle school. Alice decided to put Sunny in his place. She reminded him that the guys from the judo club had promised to kill him if he didn't apologize. Sunny immediately became quiet and lowered his head. He didn't even want to remember the threat. As it happened, the whole school knew about it. Winnie understood his mood and said mockingly that Sunny was scared. He exclaimed that he wasn't scared at all, just annoyed. The girl offered to show them all who was the strongest in the school. Winnie stared at Sunny, and he just wanted to hide somewhere. Tori joined the conversation and shouted that Sunny should put a stop to this conversation once and for all. Winnie turned around in surprise. Tori firmly said that she would go with him. Troy was tired of being a wuss. Before his reincarnation, he had been a champion in bare-knuckle wrestling. Alice arched her eyebrows in surprise. This was the first time she had seen Tori like this. Alice was used to taking care of this modest and quiet, excellent student. Mr. He told Kane that it was time to go to school to pick up Tori. He would drive over and bring her back. Kane asked his father to wait a little while and got dressed. Kane said he'd drive himself and offered to go after the girl together. Dad hesitated. He didn't think that was a good idea. The young man understood his doubts and promised that everything would be fine. He wouldn't say a word to Tori. His father sighed heavily and agreed. Finally, the last bell rang and all the students started to go home. They left the school in small groups. Tori didn't need pigtails now, and she took the rubber band off, happily mussing her hair. The girl gathered all her things into her bag and turned to Sunny. She asked if he was going to the gym. The young man nodded sullenly. Alyssa shouted that they were all going too, in case the judo club wanted to take a number. Tori turned around in surprise. Winnie smirked and showed her fist. She exclaimed that she wouldn't let Tori get hurt. Julia said fearfully that they wouldn't fight. Tori smiled and exclaimed that it was great. Troy was happy that Tori had such valuable friends and was willing to stand up for her. Tori exclaimed that they would go right away and yanked the bag of things from under the desk. An envelope, taped with a heart sticker, fell to the floor. Julia asked Tori to wait and said that something had fallen out of her desk. Tori was surprised and asked what Julia had found there. Julia picked up a pink envelope sealed with a scarlet heart and said it looked like a love letter. Troy blushed. He had never received a love letter before. Tori wondered who could have slipped her a love letter. The person who wrote the love letter was waiting for the girl at the designated spot behind the school. The narcissistic June Kim expected her to come running right away. The young man had no idea that it could be otherwise. He stood in the alley and proudly thought that no one would refuse him. Jun Kim stood right under the sakura trees, and a light breeze ruffled the trees' petals, spreading them all over the school grounds. The young man watched wistfully as the pink petals spread across the blue sky, and the nearest petal seemed to him like a heart. Jun Kim caught a petal in his palm and imagined telling the girl that these petals were very beautiful, just like Tori. After that, the girl would not be able to resist him, and he would hug her tightly. This plan seemed perfect to the young man. Meanwhile, the members of the judo club had already gathered in the gym and were waiting for their abusers. Ox exclaimed that the time had come and they should be on their guard. The vice captain offered to impress their captain and show that their club was the strongest in Rumble High School sports. 8 of the best fighters stood in front of Ox in a fighting stance with clenched fists. All of them, as one, yelled that they understood the instruction. Suddenly, the brown door with a latticed window in the middle leading to the judo room creaked open. Ox glanced glumly at his guest. All the other fighters turned around, half-turned. They didn't know who this young man was. Sunny stood in the doorway and there was no fear in his eyes. He shouted to Ox that he had come and was ready to fight him. Ox smirked and said he didn't even know what to make of him. He was impressed with Sunny's visit, but he should be pitied for his stupidity. Suddenly, Ox heard a painfully familiar voice. Tori exclaimed loudly that Ox was the idiot of the group. She wondered if Ox had accidentally forgotten what had happened between them yesterday. The girl stood glumly behind Tori's back. Ox smirked and stated that he didn't expect to see such a little girl here, and she clearly had guts. The vice captain was pleased that Tori had come too. It was a lucky coincidence, and he would be done with both schoolgirls once and for all. Tori smiled and asked contemptuously why she would be afraid of the man she had beaten. Alice looked at Tori incredulously. Ox offered to cut to the chase and suggested that Sunny hadn't come to their gym to beg for mercy. Sunny agreed. The coach scornfully said that Sunny brought all these girls to straighten out the judo club. Sunny remained silent. Alice put her arm around Tori's shoulders and told them to stay out of it. They were only spectators. Winnie was indignant, her fists itching. Sunny glumly says he's come to settle the matter definitively and challenges Ox to a duel. If he wins, Ox leaves him alone. The Ox replied that if he loses, Sunny will shut down the no-holds-barred wrestling club and join the judo club. He said it's all fair game. Since there are 5 of them, he's putting up 5 of his guys. They'll fight in an elimination match. Troy smiled. Ox couldn't imagine a match like this being perfect for Tori. Troy could easily take them all out by himself. Sunny said sullenly that he wasn't going to back down. He assumed a fighting stance and waved his hand, inviting his opponent to attack him. Ox laughed and said that was his right. He had told the 3 delinquents yesterday that they would go first in the duel. The trainer stated that only poking in the eye and punching in the groin were forbidden. Sunny realized that Ox was bullying him and decided that he would beat the first fighter to death. Suddenly, Winnie asked the young man to step aside. She smiled as if it were a pleasure trip out of town. Winnie delicately pushed Sunny away and said she could handle him herself. Sunny looked surprised at the girl, who was shorter than him and smaller in the shoulders. Alice tried to stop the girl. Troy realized with indignation that Winnie had beaten him to it and would have to wait for the next time. The fighter named Connor breathed a sigh of relief. The audience murmured happily that he was lucky and fighting girls was too easy. Sunny approached Winnie and said he didn't want to get them involved. Winnie smiled and said she wasn't worried about him at all. The girl corrected her bandaged wrists and informed Sunny that she'd actually just had itchy fists for a long time. Ox gave the command to fight. The audience began to cheer Connor on. It seemed to everyone that the girl wouldn't last a minute. Winnie assumed a protective stance and waved her arms in different directions, stretching her joints. She covered her face securely. Troy appreciated Vinny's fighting skills. He knew it wasn't a bad stance, so he figured Vinny must have a couple of good moves in his arsenal. Connor slowly approached Winnie. They were cheering him on from all sides, eager to see him knock the girl out with one punch. Connor frowned and set himself up for a quick victory. He figured he would, and then he would earn respect. At the same second, he rushed at Winnie with all his might, intending to grab her. The girl stood still, waiting for the moment. Winnie didn't show any emotion, and poor Connor realized only at the last split second that he had lost. Connor ran too openly and paid for it instantly. Winnie threw a straight right punch, and the young man immediately began to fall. Vice Captain Ox couldn't believe his eyes. Connor's a great fighter, a novice, but still. The same question froze on Sunny's lips. Just a moment ago, he'd been feeling regret for dragging the girl into his squabbles. The other spectators were as amazed as the experienced fighters. None of them had doubted Connor's fighting skills until that moment, when he decided to add Connor's other hand as well. The young man fell to his knees unconsciously. Troy looked at Winnie admiringly. The girl's performance had exceeded his expectations, and he began to respect Winnie even more. The audience began to call out for Connor, but to no avail. He didn't answer. Winnie waved her hand dismissively, calling for the next fighter. Connor was carried off the wrestling floor to a secluded spot and started slapping his cheeks, but the guy still didn't regain consciousness. Ox admitted that he had underestimated Winnie. She threw a series of punches and claimed her next opponent for herself. The tall man with blonde hair said it was his turn. Winnie didn't even look at him and kept practicing her punches. In fact, she was watching him with the corner of her eye and quickly noted everything she needed to note for herself, including her opponent's arm span and gait. Joe didn't really feel like fighting the girl, and he looked at Winnie with mixed feelings. His friends encouraged him to avenge Connor. Sunny said glumly that Joe was almost as tall as Ox, 190 centimeters. Alice was only concerned that Vinny would have trouble hitting him in the head. Tori just smiled and said that with Winnie's skills, she didn't have to aim for the head. Sunny and Alice looked at her suspiciously. Winnie roused Joe and invited him to fight. She exclaimed that he was standing still because he was scared and afraid of losing. Joe frowned at the girl and declared that her taunts would not work. He scornfully called Winnie a little girl. The girl's face changed instantly. This was a great insult to her. The girl's eyebrows arched in surprise. Winnie flew as hard as she could at her abuser, yelling as she went that she shouldn't have been called a baby. The giraffe should have looked at himself. Alice said with disappointment that it was stupid. Not only had Winnie failed, but she had fallen for her opponent's trick. The girl delivered a swift straight punch with a fury that could crush anyone in its path. Joe was an experienced fighter, so he knew exactly what to expect. The moment before the blow, he knew what was coming. So the man ducked just in time, and Winnie's fist whistled past his body. Joe thought the girl had skills. The man frowned. He could have sworn he'd even heard the sound of her punch, so powerful it was. Moreover, the girl's blow was so strong that it unraveled his heavy wrestling clothes with a wave. Joe assumed Vinny was involved in a boxing club and wondered what the rest of the members were capable of then. While Joe was thinking about all this, Winnie managed to stealthily get a little closer. She stepped noisily onto the tatami. At the same moment, she threw a swift left jab to the body. Joe barely had time to dodge and mentally praised the girl for her reaction. Ox watched the fight closely. He realized that there was no way Vinny was going to get Joe's face, so he was going to hit him in the body. Ox asked Joe to be careful. The young man shouted back that he knew himself and was now blocking all of Winnie's lunges to the body, knowing she couldn't reach her head. Sunny confusedly exclaimed that the fighters had figured out her plan. Tori grinned and replied that Winnie had actually won. There was indeed a major change on the battlefield. Joe, who was not expecting a blow to the head, suddenly received a direct blow to the nose. No one could believe it. Winnie ducked lightning fast and launched a powerful attack. One blow was enough for Joe. The three remaining fighters couldn't believe their eyes and stared in amazement at the small and fragile Winnie. Raising her fist upward, the girl stood proudly over the defeated body of her opponent. He lay unconscious, just like Connor. Winnie smiled smugly and exhaled happily. Showing her fist to her opponents, she demanded the next fighter for herself. In the judo gym, passions flared up. The militant fighters had to change their minds. Stammering, one of the men told his partner that the girl was incredibly strong. His companion was pale. 2 fighters had been defeated before his eyes. The third young man noticed that they lost to an ordinary girl. It makes you wonder if some girls are quite strong. Another man watched the fight and realized that the bout for the title of the strongest would not be easy. The boxing club performs at the proper level. Winnie was thinking the same thing. As she bandaged her wrist tighter, she thought that the competition between the clubs would be fierce this year. Sunny said with surprise that the left hook was only a fake. Alice scornfully replied that he was weaker than Vinny, and he shouldn't start his own club. Sunny turned red with anger and demanded that Alice explain. The girl laughed and said that he really didn't understand. Vinny actually had 2 scenarios going on, and so this hit was more than just a fake out. To her surprise, Alice heard Tori's quiet voice. The girl explained to Alice that her opinion was not quite right. In fact, her first strike was already a preparation for an attack. Dodging it, Joe opened his body for the next blow. Tori smiled and added that Winnie hadn't really fallen for the ruse. She'd just planned it carefully. Alice looked at Tori suspiciously. To her regret, Tori was absolutely right. And it was very strange and uncharacteristic for the girl. Tori understood her look and said she was just making things up as she went along, pretending to know what to talk about. Now Sunny was sure that Tori was Troy Key's girlfriend. This time Vinny got the huge fat man, and Tori excitedly called Julia over for the girl to look at her new rival. Suddenly, Tori noticed that Julia was gone and wondered where she had gone. Sunny glumly informed her that she had disappeared from the hall at once. Jun Kim was still standing under the sakura trees and looking up melancholically. The vid was really romantic, the pink sakura trees against the blue sky. The sakura trees continued to scatter their petals around the school grounds. Jun Kim waited patiently for the girl. He was sure Tori would come. The young man stood so long that soon his head and shoulders were thickly covered with petals. Kim couldn't believe Tori wasn't here yet. Time passed, but the young man still couldn't believe he was waiting for Tori for nothing. His romantic mood worsened, and Kim frowned. Even though his patience was running out, the young man forced himself to wait a little longer. Yulia watched him surreptitiously from around the corner. In despair, the girl sank to the ground tiredly. Jun Kim came to meet Tori despite the fact that he hadn't suggested it to other girls before. Nevertheless, Tori was not interested in the proposal at all. Julia thought that she could at least warn the young man. Jun Kim was still standing there waiting for Tori. Julia watched the object of her affection. She wondered if she should tell Kim the truth. In the judo sports club, the tournament continued. There were menacing shouts and the sound of blows from outside the door. Winnie immediately went on the attack. She ran up to her opponent and threw a series of punches. All 5 strikes reached their target. The fat man couldn't resist Winnie, so he only defended his face. The girl rewarded him generously with a hail of blows that rained down on his torso. Connor and Joe had already regained consciousness. Connor stated that Winnie was very fast. Joe grimaced and added that the girl was hitting her stride. The man kept blocking his face from Vinny's blows, and the brushes of his hands took the brunt of it. Finally, Tiger got tired of defending himself. He opened his face and lunged at Winnie, intending to grab the girl and finish her off. Winnie was alert and jumped back. The fat man was amazed at the speed with which the girl evaded his grasp. Winnie came in from the side and threw a series of punches to the right side of the body. The man had to cover his face from the attack again. He didn't like the current arrangement at all. Tiger realized that sooner or later he would be exhausted and the girl would win. He picked a good moment, and during the girl's next attack, he kicked her foot above the heel. Winnie was standing on the toes of her other foot at that moment. The girl was just about to strike hard when she realized that Tiger had tripped her, and she would inevitably fall to the tatami. That's what happened. Her own punch missed its target, and the girl fell to the green mats. Her opponent stepped aside. Alice was the first to realize what the fat man wanted to do. She shouted to Winnie and warned her of the danger. Tori froze in horror. As he accelerated, the man yelled out that he was doing a powerbomb and jumped right onto Winnie, who was still lying on the tatami. Realizing she no longer had time to get up and dodge, Winnie quickly rolled away with a yell and Tiger fell to the mats. Sunny, Alice, and Tori were very surprised. No one could have done it as quickly as Winnie. She had an incredible reaction. Winnie got to her feet and turned pale with horror. She only now realized how lucky she had been. Winnie realized that she would have been flattened if she'd been under him. The thought made her uncomfortable. The tiger huffed. He exclaimed that the girl was quite agile. Winnie tilted her head forward. She was ready to attack. Leaning one hand on the tatami and the other on his knee, the fighter tried to stand up. He promised that next time the girl would not be so lucky. Winnie watched his every move carefully. She realized that this was a good time to attack. The tiger was barely standing, head tilted slightly forward. Winnie rushed at him, intent on finishing him off. She raced faster than the wind, swinging her fist as she went. Winnie shrieked that he shouldn't have come here. Her fist slammed hard into the man's forehead. It would have knocked anyone else down, but he couldn't take it. Vice Captain Oakes asked Tiger fearfully what was wrong with him. Joe told Connor that the girl didn't miss. Tiger had taken a direct hit. Sonny smiled happily. He shouted to Winnie that she was doing a great job of defeating such a giant. He wanted to share his joy with the whole world. Suddenly, he noticed that Alice and Tori weren't even smiling. They continued to stare glumly at the battlefield. Sonny perplexedly asked the girls why they weren't cheering Winnie's victory. Alice replied that it wasn't the end of the fight. Sonny asked in surprise what Alice meant. None of the girls answered him, and Sonny turned away. The fight was really going on. The tiger didn't even defend himself, his arms hanging along his body. He took every blow Winnie threw at him without complaint. Winnie herself was almost exhausted. Smacking Tiger in the forehead once more, she asked her opponent glumly how he was still able to stand on his feet. Tiger smirked and grabbed the girl's wrist. He assumed the girl meant himself. Winnie hadn't expected such a leap. She realized she had fallen for his ruse. Tiger had waited until she was exhausted, and now he could do whatever he wanted to her. The man suddenly jerked Winnie's wrist toward him, and the girl lost her balance. She felt herself losing control of the situation. Tiger tossed the girl onto the tatami, and Winnie suddenly realized she was upside down in the air. Tiger threw her to the mat so quickly that Winnie saw his face as if in a pall of fog. It was getting farther away with each passing second. Grabbing the girl's wrist, Tiger pulled the girl toward him with force, holding her by the shoulder. She couldn't help it. Pulling Winnie to him, Tiger immediately threw her to the ground with a powerful push, not letting her resist. Winnie groaned in pain and coughed. It seemed to her that she would never be able to get up again. Tiger stepped aside, watching the girl. The kimono-clad fighters were now cheering. They praised Tiger and his victory over the girl with rapturous voices. Seeing that Winnie was still conscious, Tigra smirked and said she hadn't gotten enough. He motioned to the girl, intending to continue. The moment Tiger bent over and wanted to hurl Vinny again, Alice demanded a halt, and the fighter froze. Alice said in a firm voice that it was over. She agreed to admit that the wrestlers had won this round. Ox smiled smugly. It was a sweet victory. He exclaimed that accepting defeat was a pretty smart move for them. Alice helped Winnie up and asked what was wrong with her. The girl said she just needed to catch her breath. Now Tiger was calling for his next opponent. Tori smiled and adjusted her tie. She said she should be next in a tough elimination tournament. But Nimble Sonny was closer and said it was his turn. Tiger approved of his choice and said there was no need to hide behind the girls' backs. Troy realized with annoyance that he had been beaten again. However, there were still 3 men left. All the more reason for Sonny not to beat Ox. Sonny was thinking the same thing. The Ox was embarrassing him the most. Even if he defeated the 2, they would still lose in the end. Sonny decided he wasn't going to just give up and give it his best shot. He stretched his elbows and wrists vigorously, but Tiger had no intention of attacking the young man. He stood still with a strange expression on his face, and it surprised Sonny a little. Tiger stood still, struggling to endure the pain. He wasn't sure he could take this fight. Winnie had exhausted him. Suddenly, drops of blood appeared on Tiger's face. His eyes were closed, his body shaking with tension. A couple drops splattered on Sonny, and he finally realized what was wrong. The fat man had a split eyebrow, and he didn't want to injure himself further. Tiger grabbed his face, and Ox asked fearfully what had happened. Connor began to worry about the fighter and ran up to him. He shouted to Ox that Tiger had a split eyebrow and was bleeding like a river. Ox couldn't believe it. His powerful fighter was also out of action. He ordered Tiger to be taken to the infirmary. Troy realized at once that Vinny had succeeded in getting Tiger with that last blow. Winnie laughed happily and said that it turned out to be a draw after all. The girl was pleased to realize that at least she hadn't lost. Winnie smiled gloatingly and demanded the next fighter against their team. She was glad she had knocked out a powerful opponent. Unfortunately, Tiger had no choice but to leave the judo hall. He was very unpleasant to realize, but the forces were equal. Cursing Sonny and his crew, Tiger and Connor left the room. Winnie chuckled after them. Unlike Tiger, she was already on her feet. Wiping Tiger's blood from his cheek, Sonny involuntarily thought about Vinny's true capabilities and fighting skills. The girl split Tiger's eyebrow in one blow, and the blood splattered so hard it even got on Sonny's face. Sonny furtively glanced at Winnie and thought apprehensively that it was time that girls were not to be prejudiced against. Ox said glumly to Sonny that he hadn't expected such people on his team. One girl could take out 3 of his guys. Sonny said it was getting pretty late and suggested we end this fight quickly. He wanted to get home in time for his favorite cartoon. Ox frowned and said he was going to deal with him properly. He called Sonny a little brat sticking his nose in his own business. Ox suggested the young man not to be so confident. He still had fighters who could get him to the floor. At the same time, he called for Hans. A stocky man immediately separated himself from the audience and confirmed his willingness to fight for the judo club. Oaks reminded Hans that he had to qualify as a rookie, but this fight would be an even better test for him. Hans stepped onto the tatami, slowly approaching his opponent and examining him. The vice captain asked him to try hard. Sonny, in turn, was also studying his opponent intently. Suddenly, the young man noticed Hans's clothes and was surprised. Hans's kimono was adorned with a white belt, and it made Sonny think hard. This opponent was too easy for him. Sonny turned red with anger. He thought Ox was just messing with him and had made a weak opponent out of him on purpose. Troy was thinking the same thing. He didn't understand why Ox had taken pity on the young man and hadn't put up a stronger opponent. Troy noticed that there were other fighters in the room with black belts and more serious fighting skills. He couldn't understand at all what Ox was up to, and assumed he had some cunning strategy. Ox wouldn't just give in. Vice Captain Oaks smiled. He knew he would win. Besides Sonny, they had no one else to bet on, and he would deal with him quickly. Ox gave the fighters plenty of time to warm up their muscles and called for the fight to begin. Hans moved closer to Sonny and took a fighting stance. Sonny was not at all attracted to the idea of practicing on newcomers. He promised himself that he would make Ox regret it. The young man rushed at his opponent, forgetting his caution. He was sure Hans was not a threat. Hans didn't think of ducking. He frowned and waited for Sonny to approach, watching his every move. Sonny was so confident of his quick victory that he immediately asked for his next opponent, intending to finish off Hans with one punch. Hans looked tensely at Sonny, waiting for the right moment, and the closer Sonny got, the more Hans frowned. Sonny flew toward Hans and made a powerful lunge with his right arm, preparing to immediately attack with his left. To his surprise, Hans deflected and grabbed his elbow. At the same moment, Hans pulled his hand toward him and gripped his forearm so tightly that the young man couldn't even move his arm. That really surprised Sonny. He hadn't expected such a development at all and had expected to finish with the guy quickly. Troy watched Hans' movements carefully and immediately realized what he wanted to do. Sonny didn't have the right fighting skills. Hans turned his opponent around and threw him over himself. Sonny flew upside down and landed on his back. At that time, 2 school children were learning ball handling techniques on the basketball court. One of them was blocking the basketball basket because of his height. Alice walked leisurely through the courtyard and gazed intently at all the school children, hoping to find Julia among them. But Julia was nowhere to be seen, and Alice frowned, trying to guess where the girl could have run straight out of the judo hall. She leisurely measured step by step, treading the beautifully paved patio of the Rumble School courtyard. Alice sighed heavily. There was only one place left, and she would have to sound the alarm if Julia wasn't there. Jun Kim was waiting so diligently for Tori that he was completely oblivious to the passage of time and only stared at the pink sakura rising into the blue sky. The young man stood so long that the sakura petals showering him had turned into large cones on his head and shoulders. Yulia didn't go anywhere either. All this time she was hiding around the corner and secretly watching the object of her passion. The girl was already beginning to feel sorry for Jun because he didn't even move a step. Julia didn't expect him to be so devoted. Julia hesitated for a long time about what to do and decided to tell Jun Kim the whole truth. She can't wait any longer. At that moment, Alice put her hand on her shoulder imperiously and said cheerfully that she had found her at last. Julia hiccuped in surprise. The girl turned around frightened and saw her friend. Alice stared at Julia and asked what she was doing here. Around the corner was a garden with sakura trees. Alice looked around the corner and realized everything. This silly girl couldn't live without Jun Kim. Alyssa herself didn't expect him to be so devoted to Tori. Julia was happy to share her happiness and said that Kim was amazing. Julia suggested telling Jun Kim the truth because he was sad to look at. Alice looked at Julia seriously. She suggested that Julia herself was crazy about Jun. Julia blushed with embarrassment, and Alice immediately recognized her. Julia turned away and asked what Alice even meant. Alice thought the stupid girl had it written on her forehead. Alice suggested that Julia leave the young man alone and go back to the hall. Julia didn't like that idea and asked why Alice had decided to do that. The girl explained that the case only concerned Jun and Tori. Jun might think that Julia had just stolen his letter. Julia remained silent. Connor and Tiger, meanwhile, came to the infirmary. Fortunately, there were no other students, and the fighters entered unnoticed. The doctor skillfully washed Tiger's wound and stitched his eyebrow. He asked the young man not to wet the stitches for a few days. When the doctor finished his work, he asked who had beaten them up. Connor started to tell what had happened, but Tiger shut him up. A mental conversation took place between them. Connor realized his mistake and apologized for not thinking ahead about what might happen, but Tiger was not able to keep the secret after all. One of the students happened to be near the nurse's station and heard everything. He immediately sent several messages about the stunning news to his group's general chat room. It turned out that he was from the parallel class C and was in the 2nd grade. The young man told about the fight between the judo club and representatives of the boxing section. Mr. He, along with Kane, had arrived at the school a long time ago, but Tori was still missing. Kane asked his father to call and ask where she was. The man replied that she had lost her phone that day, and he had forgotten to buy her a new one. Kane thought that his father should have bought Tori a phone a long time ago. Kane was asking for a reason. For some reason, he had a dark premonition that something was happening to Tori and that she needed help. Meanwhile, Tori herself didn't even think about leaving. The tournament was in full swing, especially since Troy intended to outshine everyone and perform at the end. Sunny was hopping from foot to foot and trying his best to outwit his opponent. The wrestlers cheered Hans and demanded that the young man be dealt with. Troy looked thoughtfully at Sunny's counter. The young man caught Tori's gaze. He regarded the girl with mixed feelings. Tori herself didn't give a damn about Sunny. She was much more concerned with the fact that that over-the-shoulder throw had been very accurate. Then Hans effortlessly intercepted Sunny's elbow and forearm and tossed him over his shoulder onto the tatami. Ox laughed happily. T suggested Hans continue the immobilization technique called Kami Shihogatame. This technique was used when the opponent was lying on his back. The fighter rested on the opponent's chest and made him lose consciousness. Sunny still couldn't get up after the powerful throw, and Hans was about to run up to him and do what the coach had advised. Winnie shouted indignantly that Sunny had just started fighting and should continue the fight. Troy thought Sunny had thrown himself at Hans too recklessly. Without waiting for Hans to tackle him, Sunny twisted and kicked his opponent in the forehead with all his might. Hans had obviously not expected this blow, and dropped to his knees. Sunny took advantage of the moment and was immediately on his feet, ready to fight again. The vice-captain was very surprised and angry. He had not expected Sunny to be able to dodge and avoid capture. Winnie loved it, and she cheerfully shouted to the young man that his kick was just great. He should keep it up. Both opponents half-crouched tensely watching each other. Sunny breathed a sigh of relief. He was very close to defeat. Troy frowned as he watched the fight. It was only the first round of the fight, but it was clear that Hans was no novice. Sunny has a good rack, but he lacks strength and stamina. You can see that the young man has had very little training. It was only his intuition that saved him. If Hans had caught Sunny in that hold, he wouldn't have had a chance to get out. Troy Key regretfully thought that Sunny wouldn't be saved by his reflexes alone. He had too little combat experience with real opponents. Hans approached Sunny and tried to grab him, but the young man stepped back and struck him just below the hip. Hans was very surprised that the young man had gotten away from the attack so quickly. So he was not as simple as he looked. Troy rejoiced. Sunny had learned his lesson from that throw after all, and was now ready for this kind of attack. The fight was getting more and more serious. Sunny kicked Hans's leg again, and Troy realized that the young man was trying to hold on to the advantage, trying to keep his distance. The fighters in kimonos started to get indignant that Sunny keeps kicking Hans, and it's not at all in the rules. Winnie screamed that they were both jerks and their captain himself had canceled all the rules before the fight, especially since it's not forbidden in a fight without rules. Troy realized that it couldn't go on like this for much longer. Sooner or later, Hans would find a weak spot in his defense. And so it happened. At the perfect moment, Hans ducked and grabbed Sunny's leg in an elusive movement. The young man realized it too late. In his eyes, he could clearly see the real animal fear. Sunny was now at Hans's mercy. Joe and the other boy had also recognized this advantage, and were now gloatingly taunting the young man. Hans was their weapon of retaliation for their honor. Winnie squealed that Sunny was just an idiot. She just started praising him. Troy sighed. That was exactly what he'd meant. Meanwhile, Hans went on the offensive and grabbed the dazed Sunny by his collar with his free hand. With a menacing shriek, Hans rushed forward. He was like a furious beast, sweeping away everything in its path. Hans tensed all his muscles and tried to push Sunny and topple him to the ground. He felt that victory was at hand. Sunny jumped back during the push and tried to grab Hans's arm. He didn't have a second to grab his opponent's arm. Sunny tensed up and pulled his body toward his opponent in a powerful movement. He shouted and hit Hans in the head with his fist. Hans was an experienced opponent and dodged his blow just in time. Sunny's fist whistled past Hans's ear. Sunny realized with indignation that his stratagem had been unraveled in time. It was frustrating to realize that his blow had missed its target. Unfortunately, that wasn't all. Taking advantage of Sunny's hesitation, Hans deftly tripped him. Sunny lost his balance, and the next moment they were both on the ground. Hans did not let go of his foot. Sunny hit his back very hard. The worst of it was that Hans had crushed him with his body as he fell, and Sunny groaned. The young man tried to throw Hans off him, but he could not. Sunny was wasting his strength and sweating from the exertion. Hans pressed his ribs against the young man's chest and pinned his shoulder to the floor. Sunny's other arm was in a grip and he couldn't move. Joe shouted encouragingly to Hans to hold his opponent tighter. Sonny wondered for the first time if Hans had only a white belt. At that moment, Tiger and Connor appeared at the door of the hall. Tiger said with surprise that Hans was doing well. Joe asked if they were all right. Alice and Julia entered the gym too, and Winnie asked where they were earlier. Alice replied that Sonny was going to lose soon anyway, and they were going home. Meanwhile, Hans continued to apply pressure to Sonny's chest and convinced him to give up. He had never lost with this hold yet. Ox rejoiced in his victory. Hans was indeed only a white belt, but he had years of training under his belt. He shouted to Hans that it was impossible to let Sonny get free. Sonny tried his best to break free, but his opponent held him firmly. Hans had had enough of it himself. He told Sonny that he had asked for it. If he didn't want to give up, Hans wouldn't hold back. It was getting harder and harder for Hans to keep Sonny in his grip. The young man began to pull his hand away gradually, and Hans shouted that Sonny should surrender. Sonny wriggled and struggled to free himself from the stranglehold. Hans himself was flushed with tension. Sonny was already short of breath, his face flushed. He swore with his last strength that he would not quit MMA and join the judo club. Vice Captain Oaks smiled kindly. He said that he had not expected such resistance from an ordinary schoolboy. Alice demanded that Sonny give up if he didn't want to suffocate. Winnie also asked that the fight be stopped. Tori was the only one looking on thoughtfully. On the one hand, Sonny had tried to beat her up, but now he was in danger himself. Classes at the Rumble High School Sports School had long since ended, and the freed high schoolers were just walking around the yard. The fighters continued to encourage Hans, and the young man was pushing Sonny harder and harder. He was running out of air. Yet Sonny did not give up. Frowning, Alice said that Sonny could die if he continued to resist. Winnie was surprised at the young man's determination to win. Hans pressed harder and harder, and Sonny found it increasingly difficult to breathe. He realized with regret that he would not be able to break free. Squinting his eyes, Sonny tried to imagine what Troy Key would do in his place if he were caught in such a hold. Unfortunately, Sonny could no longer resist at all. His eyes began to close on their own because of the lack of air, and Sonny cursed his weakness. Hans laughed gloatingly as he felt Sonny's arm loosen. Nothing could stop him now. In a few seconds, Sonny would be unconscious. Troy couldn't bear to watch such a lackluster performance. This chokehold was not a serious challenge for him. Tori yelled that Sonny should turn the hold around in his favor. Since there was nothing he could do about it, he should just roll over. Sonny still didn't understand what was wanted of him, and Tori squealed that he should do a reverse tackle. Alice looked at Tori perplexed. It seemed only now that Sonny realized the ingenious solution to the problem. He opened his eyes and tried with all his might to throw Hans off him. At the same time, Sonny made a maneuver to the right, trying to roll over, and Hans barely kept him in his grasp. Sonny made a quick movement backward and found himself on his knees. Hans, however, still had a firm grip on the young man's neck. Joe exclaimed that Sonny hadn't broken free yet and just needed to hold him back. Ox exclaimed unhappily. He was angry. Victory was already in their grasp. Hans himself looked at the young man differently now, and even respected him a little. He realized that Sonny was not a weakling at all. Troy gave further instructions. He demanded that Sonny push off with his right hand and flip his opponent onto his back. Sonny didn't need to be told twice. He instantly found his footing and pushed off the tatami as hard as he could. He succeeded, and a surprised Hans was now lying on his back himself, continuing to hold the lock around Sonny's neck. Sonny took another leap toward Hans and forced his opponent to roll over onto his stomach. Sonny wondered what to do next. Tori quickly explained what needed to be done in order for Hans to let Sonny go, and for the young man to make a takedown of his opponent himself. Sonny quickly checked all the future operations in his head and shouted to Tori that he understood her perfectly and would do everything. Sonny threw his leg over Hans's torso and pinned him to the tatami. Hans tried to free himself, but it was hard for him to do so now. The next step in Tori's plan was to lock around Hans's neck. While holding Hans's neck with one hand, Sonny put his other arm around his wrist. Folding his hands into a lock, Sonny pressed the brush against Hans's throat. With a throaty sound of intense pain, the fighter let go of Sonny's neck. Sonny shouted happily that he had succeeded and was distracted again. He wasn't concentrating enough on his opponent's actions. Tori angrily asked Sonny why he stopped and why he wasn't taking his opponent to the castle like she explained. Sonny sat down on Hans' chest, pressing his foot on his shoulder. He pulled one of Hans's arms against his body and grabbed his elbow with the other. Troy was very indignant. Tori squealed angrily that it wasn't like that, and you had to grab above the elbow, closer to the wrist. At that moment, Hans managed to free himself. With a sharp movement of the ribs of his palm, he threw Sonny off him and said it was useless. Hans exclaimed that Sonny would never be able to catch him with this pathetic parody of a tackle. He wanted to add that there was no harm in dreaming. The fighter didn't have time to finish that sentence. Sonny managed to reach his face with a hard heel kick, and blood splattered on the tatami. The impact was so powerful that Hans flew into the air and began his flight toward his cheerleader. Vice Captain Oaks sat humbly in the lotus position and watched his hopeful pupil land at his feet with a broken nose. Ox turned pale. He was liking this situation less and less by the minute. He frowned and decided that he would punish the snooty ones. The vice captain tried to bring Hans to his senses, but the man continued to lie there with his eyes closed. The ox shouted that Hans had lost consciousness. Winnie was jumping for joy. Alice said that Sonny was very lucky, but he still won. Sonny couldn't believe his victory. He happily turned to the girls and smugly asked them if they had seen his unconditional victory. Jumping with happiness, he exclaimed that it was all thanks to Mrs. Key and nodded at Tori. Winnie took a fighting stance and wanted to give him a good punch. Troy got ahead of her and landed a powerful punch himself. Tori screamed that he shouldn't have started an MMA club without basic skills. Sonny bowed to Tori and apologized. The girl shouted that she shouldn't be called Mrs. Key. The other girls watched silently. Sonny smiled ingratiatingly and suggested that Tori call her the master's wife. The girl demanded that he immediately shut his mouth and keep it shut. Alice was the first to come out of her daze and ask what they were talking about. Winnie wondered how Tori knew how to free herself from the grip. Troy realized with regret that he had given away his skills again. He really wanted to tell the girls the truth. Tori pretended to have just noticed them and asked Alice in surprise when they had time to return. Tori said that Julia had left without telling anyone. Julia blushed with embarrassment. It was very unpleasant for her to confess. Mentally, the girl muttered that with Tori's letter he'd gone to Jun. Julia was so ashamed of her act that she could not bring herself to tell the truth and hid the ill-fated letter behind her back. The vice captain told the girls that they should talk about it at another time. Tori turned around and thought Ox had come at just the right moment. Ox frowned and said that he himself would be the next fighter. He sullenly hinted that he wanted to fight Sonny. Ox squinted his eyes and exclaimed that it was time to deal with this once and for all. He was about to put an end to what they had started. Winnie couldn't help herself and teased Sonny with Ox, playing off his phrase. Sonny got angry and yelled that Winnie was talking nonsense. He looked firmly at Ox and said he'd had enough of the games. It was time to figure out their relationship. Troy looked at Sonny questioningly. Tori shouted after the young man and asked him if he was sure of his victory. Sonny felt unsure, his body trembling. After a little thought, Sonny decided to confess to the girl after all and replied that he was a little doubtful of his abilities. Tori said he should give up right away if he knew he was going to lose. Sonny proudly replied that he would not give up under any circumstances. He told me that from the beginning he made a vow to himself not to give up as long as he could still stand on his feet. Troy smiled. That explanation suited him just fine. Even though Sonny didn't fight well, he had the will to win. Alice frowned, noting that Sonny was talking too much. Winnie immediately shouted that he was just showing off. In her heart, she approved of Sonny's determination. Troy was pleased. He finally saw in Sonny the spirit of a real fighter. He decided it was worth protecting the Ultimate Fighting Club for that reason. The battered fighters demanded revenge and cheered Ox on. Ox smirked and asked Sonny to prepare for battle. Frowning at the coach, Sonny remembered how Ox had thrown him through the gym door, and he hadn't even been able to fight back. But here the situation was a little different. The surface of the gym was lined with gym mats, and Sonny hoped to last longer. Without a doubt, the Ox was the most serious opponent. At 2 meters tall, his large bull neck and muscular build made him the perfect killing machine. Sonny realized that only a miracle would help him win, so he decided to use the element of surprise. He immediately launched himself at his opponent with terrifying screams. Sonny hoped it would confuse Ox at least a little. Tori and Alice patiently watched the boy's actions. Winnie was pleased with Sonny's positivity and encouraged him. The vice captain didn't even move from his seat. He only squinted his eyes and said that this was a very presumptuous act. Sonny raced faster than the wind. Just as he had done with Hans, he was painting a picture in his mind that he would be able to take his opponent down with one blow. Suddenly, stopping at the very feet of Ox, Sonny dropped to his knees and bowed his head respectfully. He said he was surrendering. Everyone in the audience gasped in amazement. Tori said that Sonny was a jerk. Winnie couldn't believe her eyes and said he was just messing with everyone. Ox laughed and told the young man that he should have surrendered at once, and then he wouldn't have had to waste so much time. If the vice captain could have seen Sonny Yan's face duck to the floor, he wouldn't have been so cocky. The young man looked at Ox with hatred. With a lightning jerk, Sonny pulled his body up and grabbed his opponent's ankle tightly. Ox realized it too late. He grudgingly thought Sonny had spent him, and turned pale at the thought of Sonny gaining an advantage early in the fight. Sonny pulled Ox's leg as hard as he could towards him and shouted across the room that he was really just kidding. The vice captain lost his balance and flew into the air, falling on his back. On the way out, he imagined the vengeance he would exact on Sonny. All the wrestlers as one started shouting that it was unfair and mean, and Sonny Yan was just a conniving person, and it was unacceptable to fight like this. Sunny ran up to the Ox lying on the gym mats and squealed that everything was by the book. He just had a special strategy. He started hammering his fists at Ox with all his might. The vice captain realized the best thing to do was to cover his face. Alice bewilderedly realized that it was all a trick and said that such a trick wouldn't work in the competition. Winnie encouraged Sunny to beat Ox unconscious. Troy thought for a moment. Sunny had actually turned out to be quite good. He was quick to learn from his mistakes and yet had potential. Unfortunately, with all of this, Sunny lacked a lot of experience. In addition, he was reckless in attacking without thinking things through. Choosing an opportune moment, Vice Captain Ox intercepted Sunny's wrist, and his next blow missed its target. Sunny instinctively realized that something very wrong had happened, but his eyes refused to believe that the Ox had managed to catch him. As it turned out, the infuriated coach caught the unsuspecting Sunny's fist near his forehead and angrily said it hurt. Sunny decided to go for broke. In a futile attempt to wrench his arm free, he swung his other arm, intending to incapacitate Ox. The Ox was alert and at the right moment pulled the young man's arm toward him with all his might. The surprised Sunny lost his balance and flew over the coach. In the next second, the situation changed dramatically. Sunny landed on all fours, and the freed Ox slowly got up from the tatami. The moment the dazed Sunny got up from the floor, the Ox was already on his feet and preparing to deliver a hard blow to the young man's back. A worried Winnie couldn't help but warn Sunny, and squealed with all her might that he was in danger from behind. Sunny glanced at Ox and mentally told the girl that she didn't have to say anything. He already knew about it. The young man turned around in a split second and swung a powerful punch at Ox's face. Years of training had not been in vain. Ox instantly crouched down, dodging the blow, and quickly stood up. At the same moment, the coach grabbed Sunny by the top of his shirt. Troy was the only one who understood perfectly well where Ox's further actions would lead. He had accepted that it was over for Sunny. The vice captain tensed up and took Sunny in a headlock. It cost him a great effort. The heavy strain made his face redden. Grabbing Sunny by the collar of his shirt, the Ox pulled the young man off the floor in one motion and lifted him above him. Tiger rejoiced more than anyone else. He regretted that he himself had not been able to stand up to this arrogant man, and praised Ox. The Ox suddenly leaned over. He shoved Sunny, holding him by the collar. The young man flew down onto the tatami with speed. Sunny had only one life-saving thought in his head as he fell. The matting was soft, and it would withstand the impact, but the Ox wasn't going to let the boy go. He kept holding him by the shirt, as if he was afraid Sunny would run away. The young man looked worriedly at the rapidly approaching floor, and it occurred to him that a blow of such force he might not be able to withstand. The competition between the boxers and the judo club was interesting for everyone to watch. The schoolchildren quickly passed the information along the chain. Kane looked out the window, but Tori was still gone. As luck would have it, the phone rang. The young man answered irritably, saying that Michelle could take care of it. Despite all the arguments of the caller, the young man politely replied that there was no way he could come now. He was very busy. This call was very important to Kane, and he thanked the caller for his understanding. The young man promised to call Mr. Tracy in the morning. Kane sighed heavily, and Mr. He inquired if all was well with his company. The man assured him that Kane could leave if he needed to. He didn't have to have time for everything. He could do his homework too. The schoolchildren were discussing something heatedly by the car, and Kane became interested. His father kept urging his son to go, but Kane couldn't hear him anymore. One of the schoolchildren exclaimed that it was a must-see. Kane followed them. Mr. He angrily asked if Kane was listening to him. The young man opened the door and explained that he needed to check something. The father couldn't understand that and called Kane in surprise. The young man asked him to wait for Tori in the car and to call if she showed up. Mr. He watched in astonishment as his son hurriedly headed towards the school. He had absolutely no idea why Kane went inside. Meanwhile, in the judo hall, the elimination tournament continued. Ox and Sunny were testing each other's mettle. The Ox grabbed the young man by the collar of his shirt again and lifted him higher. Sunny couldn't do anything. Everything was happening very fast. Bending over, Ox tossed the young man onto the mats, holding his wrist to keep him from grabbing it. Sunny fell on his back and it was quite painful, despite the mats being soft and protective against such occurrences. The girls glumly watched Sunny's beating. Winnie covered her eyes. Julia said enthusiastically that Ox was very strong. Sunny groaned and tried to stand up, leaning on his arm. The Ox respectfully told the young man that he didn't want to give up no matter what. Coach didn't want to fight anymore. He told Sunny peacefully that he had never met anyone like him before, and that meant a lot. Ox frowned and stated that there had been more than enough violence within these walls today. So he suggested that Sunny surrender. Sunny struggled to get up and repeated that he would fight Ox as long as he could stand on his feet. Sunny yelled that he would never give up and threw his fist in Ox's direction. The coach was already familiar with many of his tricks and backed away. The vice captain intercepted Sunny's fist and squeezed it with his huge palm. He was still giving the young man a chance to come to his senses. Sunny turned pale. He realized that he was going to have to pay for this unaimed blow with a pain in his back. Ox pulled Sonny's arm toward him and grabbed him by the shoulders, and then by the collar of his shirt. Sonny couldn't even move. A few seconds later, the coach pulled Sonny off the ground again and lifted him higher, hoping the young man would beg for mercy. Sonny wasn't going to budge, and Ox angrily threw him to the gym mats with even more force than last time. Sonny groaned. A heavy wheeze came from his throat. Sonny was almost crying with resentment, pain in his eyes. Winnie shouted that he'd better give up. Julia asked how he could be so stubborn and fight to win at the cost of his life. Ox slowly leaned over to Sonny and asked if the boy had changed his mind this time. Barely moving his tongue, Sonny replied that he wouldn't give up. Ox liked the boy's tenacity, especially since he needed a girl. Ox made a concession and said that he would not require the young man to leave the MMA club. He wondered if Sonny would surrender in such a case. Suddenly, the coach's sensitive ear heard ringing voices in the judo hall. He turned around unhappily. 10 or 20 schoolchildren stood at the threshold and unceremoniously filmed the whole action on their cell phones. One of them recognized Sonny, the founder of the No Holds Barred Wrestling Club. The girl assumed he had lost to the club's vice-captain in judo. Ox angrily wailed that no one had invited them to the judo hall and demanded that the room be cleared immediately. While the coach was distracted by the uninvited guests, Sonny punched Ox in the neck with all his might. The coach didn't expect such meanness from the young man. The school children made a joyful noise. They realized that the fight was not over yet, and they ran into the hall just in time. Ox went black and asked Sonny if he had heard what the schoolboys had said, implying his defeat. Sonny threw his fist again towards the coach's face, and proudly said that the captain of the MMA club can't lose to a vice-captain. Troy smiled imperceptibly. He appreciated Sonny's resilience even more than the Ox did. All doors were opening for this guy. The angry Ox wasn't going to make any more concessions. Sonny had had enough of him. He screamed that he was going to eat him to death. The coach forcefully pinned the wrist of Sonny's hand to the gym mats, and the young man couldn't even move a finger. Ox immediately wrapped his free hand around the wrist of his arm and formed a powerful lock. He pressed his whole body against Sonny. Coach exclaimed, applying Kimura's painful hold. Gasping, Sonny tried to free himself and yelled that it was too hard. Winnie couldn't bear to see it and wailed that Sonny should give up, or the Ox would totally cripple him. Alice and Tori frowned. Sonny's body trembled. He tensed as he struggled to free himself from his grasp and shouted that he would never surrender to the enemy in his life. Coach sullenly said he'd already spent too much time on Sonny. It was time to end it once and for all. The Ox pounced on Sonny with redoubled strength. The young man twisted as hard as he could, but he couldn't free himself from the grip. Suddenly there was a loud crunch. Tears came to Sonny's eyes. A grimace of pain twisted his face. It was obvious that he was struggling to hold on. Every slightest movement was agony from hell. Grasping his injured forearm, Sonny screamed in pain. Satisfied with the result, Ox returned to his men. They greeted the winner with joy. Winnie ran up to the young man and asked what had happened. Ox gritted his teeth admonishingly that Sonny wasn't strong enough to start a club at this school. He'd better go and read books. Vinny tried to pick a fight. Alice examined the young man and stated that he had a sprain. Ox replied that it was Sonny's own fault. He had the option of giving up. The school children who had come to gawk at it murmured unhappily. It was quite boring and they were only wasting time. The forces were too unequal. Suddenly there was a ringing voice. Tori shouted that this was not the final victory and their battle was not over. The girl exclaimed that they were in a 5-on-5 duel, and their team had only 2 contestants eliminated. One of the students recognized Tori. Ox smiled indulgently and asked what she was chirping about, if she meant that they still had fighters. Tori said firmly that he had gotten it right. Sonny said he would continue the fight. Alice asked him not to move. She still had to set the young man's sprain. Ox laughed and suggested that Tori was just messing with him. The girl stood her ground and demanded that the fight continue. The coach dismissively pointed towards Julia and said that that girl in glasses would certainly not be able to beat him. Tiger stated that Ox had always looked down on the karate club. Joe said that explained a lot of things, particularly the unspoken war between the karate and judo clubs. Alice informed Vinny that she had set Sonny's arm right, but still needed to go to the nurse's station. Ox looked at her and said that he could still fight her. The students discussed among themselves the scowling girl who could show top class. But the whole school knew about her vow to never fight again. One of the students said in surprise that he was hearing about it for the first time. The other said condescendingly that he was just a newcomer and began to tell the story. The young man began his narrative in a low voice. The events that caused Alice to stop fighting happened about a year ago. Alice heard her person being discussed and turned around angrily. Her eyes spewed lightning bolts. But these schoolboys were innocent. What could they take? The narrator caught Alice's angry look and hastily said he'd better shut up. Troy listened intently to their conversation. He wanted to know too. Ox turned to Tori and stated that there was no one left on their team, and she knew it herself. He added that she was the only one left. The girl shouted angrily that this time he had hit the mark, and she would fight him as captain of the no-holds-barred wrestling club. The vice-captain frowned. The little one was clearly asking for trouble, and she needed to be taught a lesson. Winnie immediately turned in their direction. She thought she had misheard. Julia looked fearfully at Tori. She thought it was a joke. The school children murmured excitedly. The events looked completely different now. Of course, no one thought that a frail girl could be the captain of the club. Sunny looked at Tori excitedly. He was the only one present who knew about the girl's abilities. Alice shrieked that Tori was crazy. Sunny continued to stare at 3. She forbade saying it out loud, but she couldn't forbid thinking about being Master Troy Key's wife. Tor asked Ox if he had any objections. Ox had nothing against it, and the girl suggested to start the duel. All the students in the school made a lively noise. Alice ran up and told Tori that she was crazy. The girl explained that Ox had already won yesterday, so it was no big deal. Alice shouted angrily that the girl was acting completely different. Despite her appearance, she could swear it was a completely different person. Troy turned around and said that Alyssa was absolutely right, so stop patronizing her as much as the old Tori. Tori smiled and told Alice that she was doing great. Alice was surprised. This Tori was acting completely different and was getting into fights herself. Tori stepped off the tatami and tossed her shoes aside. Alice tried to remember when the girl had changed so much. Leaning against the wall of the hall, Tori began to remove her stockings. Ox watched the girl carefully. He was sure it wouldn't come to that. Ox smiled lustfully and told himself that it had finally happened. After all, Tori had actually been his priority target. Even though Ox was in a lot of pain that day, he was aroused just by the thought of such a beautiful girl doing it. All the while, he was thinking about Tori. Now, as soon as Tori began to remove her stockings, Ox almost squealed with delight. He couldn't believe he was going to feel her body close to him again. Completely oblivious, Ox even extended his tongue in excitement. He even mentally gave Tori permission to put himself on the mats and do whatever he wanted to him. The students murmured. Everyone could see what Ox was thinking now. Winnie said angrily that it was just gross. Alice looked at the lustful expression on the vice-captain's face with indignation. She told herself that such behavior was simply unacceptable. Sunny looked at Tori with concern. The Ox was in top form today. He sincerely hoped the master's wife knew what she was getting into. The girl straightened out her stockings and stepped confidently onto the green pavement. She said firmly that she was ready for battle. The cheerleaders started yelling that Ox needed to be careful with her. She could kill him. One of the students was videotaping the whole thing. Tori was even more beautiful up close, but she had no chance of beating the huge Ox. Another student said that Tori wouldn't have volunteered to fight if she didn't know how to fight. One of the boys said she was quiet and studious. A young man nearby said that a girl could win if she knew how to fight. His interlocutor agreed with the argument. Another schoolboy suggested comparing the girl's frail body to Sunny's muscular one. Everyone saw that he couldn't stand up to Ox. He added contemptuously that a fist like hers could only tickle you to death. Tori ignored him and wrapped the tie around her fist. In another group of students were discussing that Ox was too tall, and Tori wouldn't even be able to get him with a punch to the head. And hitting the body won't do any good, especially since the girl has a right knee injury. In front of the astonished onlookers, the Ox suddenly jumped out of his seat and rushed toward Tori. Now all eyes were fixed on him. Everyone murmured that Ox had made the first move and rushed over. Tori really did look like a defenseless girl who could do nothing to Ox. In fact, there was another reason. Ox was simply exhausted with desire and couldn't stand it any longer. He was eager to fight Tori as soon as possible. Sunny shouted and warned the girl of the danger. He forgot himself and called Tori the master's wife in public again. Ox was very close and reached out voluptuously to the girl. Tori turned angrily toward Sunny. The lustful Ox opened his fist and was ready to grab the girl's breasts. Tri didn't seem to notice and shouted angrily that she shouldn't be called the master's wife. There was a mute question in Sunny's eyes. He was beginning to regret that he had distracted Tori and given the Ox the advantage at the beginning of the fight. At the last moment, the girl's feet left the ground in a leap. Sunny wondered what to call Tori now. Tori jumped back, preventing herself from being grabbed by Ox, and at the same time she thrust her body upward, straightening her leg for a powerful kick. Ox couldn't believe that Tori had managed to dodge, and gingerly tried to anticipate the girl's next actions. Straightening her leg in flight, Tori aimed her kick at Ox's face. The vice-captain realized her intentions too late to move away. Against all odds, Tori managed to get a powerful blow to Ox's head. He was frozen in place, stunned. Despite the fact that the girl was small in stature, in the jump she managed to reach the goal due to good stretching and show incredible class. All the doubters were simply stunned. Not once during the competition had they ever seen such a level of performance. Tori completed the jump and gracefully lowered herself to her feet. Ox was still hopeful and tried to reach for the girl. Julia, Winnie, and Alice now looked at Tori with completely different eyes. They were convinced that the girl was committing suicide. Tori stood still for a second, head bowed, as if bowing after a successful performance. Her eyes were closed. Sunny looked at Tori with concern. He didn't know what was happening to her, and he thought she needed help. At that moment, Tori opened her eyes and stared intently at Sunny. She demanded to be called Master from now on. Ox's body could not withstand the tension, and he collapsed on the sports mats under the admiring gazes of the audience. The girl's instant victory led to lively conversations. One guy excitedly said he couldn't believe it. The interlocutor said confusedly that the girl had knocked Ox out. Another young man shuddered at what he saw. That roundhouse kick was very powerful and knocked him out with a single blow. Another man shouted that this whole bullshit was stunning. Tori has gained widespread respect. Tiger, Joe, and Connor tried to bring Ox to his senses. Tori advised him not to get involved with the MMA club again. Sunny analyzed what had happened. From what he knew, not even Ox himself was capable of such a blow. And it made him wonder. Alice was struck by Tori's incredible flexibility. Avoiding her opponent's powerful blows, she was able to strike back with a devastating blow. Alice looked suspiciously at the calmly dressing Tori and wondered when she had time to become so strong. All the students immediately swarmed Tori and began begging for her phone number and offering their friendship. Tori was swiveling her head around every now and then and blurting out that she didn't have a phone and didn't need anyone's friendship. The girl walked over to her friends and glumly motioned for them to leave the hall. The other students looked at her warily. Tori only now noticed Alice's suspicious look on her face. She stopped in front of her friends in surprise. Julia was very surprised. Winnie was sure that the girl was secretly training with martial arts masters. Only Alice was silent. She stared at Tori as if asking her a mute question. The stare made Tori uncomfortable, and she looked away. Alice reached out and stroked Tori's hair carefully. She said that Tori had mussed her hair. Tori was struck by such care. Alice explained that the girl needed to watch her appearance. Putting her hands on Tori's shoulders in a friendly way, Alice suggested going home. She told Sunny that the Ox wouldn't be touching him anytime soon. Sunny agreed to that. Winnie asked him to remember to stop by the doctor's office. The girls, engrossed in conversation, headed for the exit. Suddenly, Tori saw a completely new person. Among all the school children, a girl in a white blouse and light blue hair stood out very much in her appearance. Troy had forgotten that he was in the girl's body. He opened his mouth in surprise and stared at the girl. She seemed even more beautiful than Tori. A girl with a sad look was walking slowly across the hall. Kane was not far away, and he too noticed the beautiful woman walking away. The girl with the enigmatic smile was like a magnet, and Kane stared at her for a long time. For a moment, he thought she was an angel in the flesh. But the girl was gone, and Kane sighed heavily. Suddenly, his gaze was on the girl he'd come here for. Tori was walking towards him, and she was just perturbed at how strange Kane was looking at that obscure girl with the blonde hair. They walked to the car together, and her father asked why Tori had been so late. She replied that she had been helping to clean up. Her dad asked how school was going and if she was having fun there. Tori grinned. Of course it had been a lot of fun. She glanced furtively at Kane. He was in the judo room too, and it was a good thing that girl had distracted his attention. Kane was silent, and it was impossible to tell from the way he looked that he had witnessed the fight. Troy couldn't figure out what was on Kane's mind. It was late evening, lessons had ended long ago, and there was no one to be seen on the grounds of Ramble School. It turned out that not everyone had left the school. A young man in a darkened room was watching the very video with Ox and Tori, and commenting enthusiastically on it. He told his interlocutor that it was unbelievable. The man at the window puffed on his cigarette and said that the video was spreading at the speed of a virus. The video ended with a full-length image of Tori. She warned the fighters that they should stay away from the no-holds-barred fight club. The man with the cigarette smirked gloatingly. The MMA club was of some interest to him. The man turned to the person sitting on the desk and said it was time to break the unwritten agreement. Other than the two men, the school compound was quiet, and no one gave away their presence. The night watchman slowly made his evening rounds of the grounds. Day after day he did this procedure, and usually nothing happened. He reached the corner of the school and clearly heard a long sigh. The watchman was surprised that not everyone had left yet. He came closer and shone his flashlight. Nothing could be seen, and the watchman rounded the corner of the school. The sighing continued. The guard said irritably that the school had been closed for a long time. Shining his light on the source of the sound, the man was scared to death. He had never seen such monsters before. Dropping the flashlight, the guard quickly ran away. The reason for his panic was Jun Kim. Sakura petals dotted him from head to toe, and he turned into a talking dome. Jun Kim sighed heavily for Tori. He couldn't believe that he had wasted so much time because she had to come. It was night. The windows in Mr. He's big mansion were lit up. All the members of his family were busy doing their own things. Troy was soaking in a hot bath. Kane hadn't asked anything about school, and that was suspicious. Troy figured he didn't care about his little sister. He barely managed to brush his hair. His long hair was causing a lot of inconvenience and was constantly tangled together. Troy wondered if it wouldn't be easier to just cut his hair. His intuition told him that someone was in the room. Kane crept up behind Tori as quietly as possible and gently pulled his hand toward her, intending to grab her shoulder. The girl reacted instantly and ducked under his arm, intercepting her wrist and reaching for the young man's forearm with her other hand. Grabbing Kane's arm in a lock, Tori jerked it toward her with an intimidating yell. The opponent was quite heavy. Kane shouted fearfully to the girl that it was him, her brother, and no need to show off your fighting skills on him. Tori turned her head in surprise and saw that it was actually Kane. Still, the defense reflexes did their job. Kane was surprised to realize that his body had lifted off the floor and into the air. He couldn't believe that fragile Tori could do that. The next moment, Kane was flying backward, dragging Tori with him. It happened so fast that he didn't realize it. Mr. He was just sitting comfortably on the sofa and reading the divorce manual. A loud sound caught his attention. Tori had hit her head very hard in the fall and was now whining that her head was just splitting from the headache. Tori couldn't stop screaming in pain. The girl lay back on her brother's arm, and Kane asked glumly if she wanted to release his hand. Tori jumped off the cot in a flash, wondering why he'd even bother sneaking up on her. Kane was surprised to realize that Tori had gotten heavier. He said that Tori herself understood exactly why. Troy couldn't believe that Kane had tried to possess Tori. Her body was shaking with anger. Kane told her that he had heard about her battle and couldn't help but see for himself. Tori realized that Kane knew absolutely everything. He asked what happened to his sister, who used to be afraid of the little bugs and now fights on par with the guys at school. He said it was as if someone had possessed Tori. The girl looked up with surprised eyes. Kane hadn't realized how close he'd come to the truth. He sat and looked at Tori in silence. Troy thought that Kane had guessed, unbelievably, that it wasn't his sister at all. Troy looked at Kane. The young man was rather secretive and self-possessed. Nevertheless, Troy thought Kane might be useful. He didn't know if he could trust Kane. After all, Kane might just not believe him and send him to a mental institution. There wasn't much choice, so Troy made a decision. He exhaled, and in one fell swoop he told her everything about his past and the transmigration of souls. Troy looked at Tori carefully. Kane sat on the couch, expressing no emotion. For a moment, Troy was glad, sincerely hoping the young man believed him. The young man looked at his sister suspiciously. Kane had seen something wrong with her for a long time, but her speech made him frown. So Kane promptly dragged her to the very medical center from which Tori had been discharged after falling off the roof. Tori screamed that they hadn't agreed to do that. Kane had promised to buy her a new phone. Her brother grabbed her arm roughly and promised that he would buy it after he talked to the doctor. Kane's grip was too strong and Tori couldn't get free. She squealed that Kane had completely misunderstood, that it was a joke. It was bad enough that he had to try another tactic. Tori pretended to sob and sobbed a long sob, calling him Big Brother. Kane immediately let go of her hand and turned in the other direction. Tori couldn't believe her happiness. Kane had given up too quickly. She looked after her brother with hope in her eyes, secretly afraid that Kane would change his mind and want to take her to the doctor again. Kane suddenly turned around and looked at the girl sternly. Tori didn't like the look in his eyes, and she suspected a trick. Kane pointed a finger at her hair and angrily asked when Tori had last groomed her hair. Besides, he didn't like the blue, tattered jeans with holes in them. Kane said Tori had lost her sense of style. The most important point of accusation was the corner with her perfumes and cosmetics. During Tori's absence, it had become overgrown with cobwebs. Kane grabbed Tori like a lousy kitten. She squealed that she would make sure to comb her hair and wear makeup every day. Troy was already regretting his short-sightedness. It was obvious that Kane wouldn't believe him. He shouldn't have told him everything. Troy didn't even realize where he'd gone wrong. All of Kane's arguments about makeup, clothes, and perfume meant nothing to him. There was really only one thing that confused Kane. Tori had never called him Big Brother. That's what made him hesitate. The psychiatrist was available, and Kane and Tori had no trouble getting in. The young man asked directly what was going on with his sister. This question, the doctor misunderstood a little. According to his observations, Tori had no abnormalities. Tori snorted contemptuously. She sat comfortably at the table with one leg over the other. Kane thought he'd misheard her at first. The doctor reported that her tests showed that her health was normal. Tori started making faces and teasing Kane. She was elated that her brother couldn't prove anything. However, there was something else. The doctor said that Tori was pregnant. Kane couldn't believe it anymore and asked to repeat it. It was far worse for Troy himself than it had been for Kane and his father. This terrible word could only be compared to a huge meteorite hurtling toward Earth. Tori stood up from the table. The whole world collapsed for her. The girl screamed that there was no way she could be pregnant. Tori slammed her fist forcefully on the table and wailed that it was a mistake and the labs needed to be checked again. Troy blushed, trying to prove his point. Even though he was in the girl's body, Tori had never had contact. Suddenly, he realized everything. When Troy had entered Tori's body, he couldn't know anything for sure, and the girl could very well be pregnant. It explained a lot of things. The girl could not live with such shame, and so she decided to commit suicide. But then he'd have to give birth in this body. Troy shrieked that he couldn't bear it. Footsteps were heard outside the office door. Some doctor was telling the woman that her husband was obsessed with becoming a gynecologist. He promised to help the poor man. Suddenly, he saw Kane and Tori and said it wasn't their turn at all. The doctor asked the trickster why he was sitting in his seat. Kane asked in surprise who the man was. The man said that he was the doctor, and the man at the table was a patient at their clinic. Tori was indignant and suggested that she wasn't pregnant. The doctor offered to read the test results. The doctor silently read the doctor's diagnoses, occasionally nodding his head. The doctor silently read the doctor's diagnoses, nodding occasionally. Tori was shaking with anticipation. Her whole fate depended on this piece of paper. She asked the doctor impatiently what was wrong with her tests. Unfortunately, the patient was not wrong. Tori was actually pregnant and 9 months later had already given birth, following the advice of the obstetricians. Troy almost cried from helplessness and what he would have to go through. He was screaming that he didn't want to do this. The midwives were helping the laboring woman get everything done. A short time later, Tori's screams were heard in the delivery room. The doctors shouted that the baby was on its way out. Troy couldn't believe it, but he actually became the baby's mom. The boy was born healthy, and Tori asked to hold him close. The nurse held up the baby. It had green hair. The baby squealed for milk and called her the master's wife. The baby looked remarkably like Sunny. Tori couldn't stand it and screamed. The whole neighborhood heard her screaming from Mr. He's house. Tori woke up all wet from her nightmares. She realized with disbelief that it was just a scary dream. Kane was standing on the balcony with a cigarette in his teeth. He didn't want to sleep at all. He flicked on his lighter and lit the cigarette. The young man took a drag and looked thoughtfully into the distance. Tori and her oddities had kept him on his toes. Her fighting skills were very high. Kane easily reconstructed the events of 10 years ago. It was snowing lightly outside that day, and he and his father were at home. A cab pulled up in front of their fancy house. A woman and a little girl got out of the car, carrying several bags with things. The woman smiled thoughtfully and looked at her daughter. It was not an easy decision to make, but she was willing to do anything for her daughter. The girl looked at her mother apprehensively. Her mother had brought her to a completely new place. She had never been here before. Sighing, the woman walked up to the house and resolutely rang the wooden doorbell with a beautiful multicolored stained glass window. A man with glasses named Frank immediately opened the door. The woman greeted the owner warmly, and he kindly invited the mother and the girl inside. Kane himself was lying quietly on the couch and reading one of the sports magazines. His father asked him to look at the guests. The young man reluctantly got up from the couch, and his father introduced him to his new mother and younger sister. The woman felt uncomfortable and said quietly that there was no need for formality. Kane was about 15 years old at this point, and he was not an easy person to get along with. The young man frowned at the guests. The girl did not like that uncle at once, and she hid behind her mother's back. The woman turned to her daughter in surprise, realizing at once the reason for her fear. She took her daughter's hand and explained that she didn't need to be afraid. The woman promised that no one would tease her now, and Kane could be called her big brother. Kane frowned at the woman and declared that her daughter was not his sister, and the woman herself was not his mother. His own mother was dead. The young man turned around and walked away. An angry Frank tried to get him back, but the woman said it was okay. The boy just needed to be given time. As he thought about all of this, Kane stared glumly into the distance and smoked on the balcony. Just as he had on that distant day, he heard his father calling him. The man went out on the balcony and asked his son why he was still awake. Kane replied that he was going to finish his cigarette and go to bed. Frank asked if Tori liked the new phone. Kane replied that she just picked up the first one she saw, and it didn't even have a decent camera. The man walked to the railing, looking down thoughtfully. At that moment, Kane's phone rang, and the young man answered the girl that he hadn't called yet. He asked Michelle to take care of things for him. Frank realized he'd only be in the way, so he asked Kane not to stay out too late. The next morning, Michelle was in the USA in one of the offices with a beautiful view of the sea. She told the interlocutor that Mr. Tracy wanted to speak to him specifically. The girl stated that Tracy was becoming increasingly impatient, and it was simply unbearable to tolerate his antics. Michelle told Kane that she had a very bad feeling, and he should deal with all of this as soon as possible. The girl said goodbye and ended the call. Suddenly, she heard someone's voice. The young man said contemptuously that Kane had started the company, and left her to take care of things only because of a high school friendship. The man in the white suit smiled and said that was pretty irresponsible. Michelle asked how Peter managed to get into the office. The girl asked the young man to leave her office. Peter reluctantly stood up and reminded her that he owned the company's shares, and Michelle was just a girl on the run. Michelle didn't hesitate to reply that this was the president's office, and only she, as the first deputy, was allowed to be here. The young man smirked and skewered Michelle. No president abandons his own enterprise. Mr. Tracy is hard to work with. There was quite a bit of truth in his words, and Michelle couldn't help but agree. The girl hesitantly said that Kane would deal with it. Peter approached Michelle and smiled affectionately. He stated that the girl was too kind to Kane, but the guy didn't reciprocate. Peter leaned closer to Michelle and whispered that she had been cleaning up Kane's mess all day. He wanted to add that Michelle could help him, but he didn't have time. The girl didn't wait for things to develop and hit Peter with a knee to the groin area with all her might. The young man's face flushed red with tension. He was in unbearable pain. His eyes felt like they were going to pop out of their orbits. Peter was lying on the floor and couldn't even move. Michelle warned that next time she would sue for sexual harassment. At the door, the girl turned around and said angrily that Kane was sure to handle everything. They just had to wait a little longer. Michelle slammed the door, leaving the young man lying on the floor. Peter groaned in pain, holding his bruised arm. His bruised ego demanded revenge. Peter grinned gloatingly and promised himself that he'd deal with the arrogant man. It was about an hour before Peter finally felt strong enough to get up. He made a series of necessary phone calls. It was the beginning of a new school day at Rumble High School. A voice came over the loudspeaker wishing everyone a good day. Frank brought Tori in and asked her to leave school right after classes ended. Besides, she can call if she needs anything. Troy thought angrily about Kane. He was the reason he kept having nightmares about the birth. Plus, Kane is convinced that Tori has lost her mind. If this kept up, he might be committed to a harsher facility, and Troy wasn't going to be locked up for the rest of his life. Besides, another clinic could have used completely different methods and completely eliminated Troy Key's personality. As he gets closer to the school, Troy decides that he's already gotten this far. He needs to stop and play the part of good girl Tori. Suddenly, Troy saw school children running towards him from all directions. Everyone now recognized Tori, who had knocked Ox out with a single leg kick. She continued to be bombarded with questions, interrupting each other. Someone wanted to meet her. One girl asked me to teach her how to fight like that. One of the guys whispered to the other that Tori would date whoever beat her. Troy indignantly thought that was too much. One of the guys suggested that the partners try to beat the girl. The dark-haired guy with pigtails grinned and said it was worth a try. At the same moment, several people flew off to the side at once. Tori shouted angrily that she wanted nothing to do with them. The girl unceremoniously pushed everyone in her way, working her elbows vigorously. Everyone murmured resentfully that Tori was leaving. Troy Chi could barely contain his emotions. He was only standing up for himself, and there was no need to make a legend out of him, much less make up gossip. Walking through the admiring crowd of kids in the school's hallway, Troy Key purposefully headed towards his second-year class. He breathed a sigh of relief. At least it would be quiet. As luck would have it, one of his classmates said she'd seen that video and Tori was now a celebrity. On the way to her seat, Tori ran into Sunny. The young man smiled and said hello to Tori, calling her the master's wife. The girl looked at him angrily. Troy instantly remembered his nightmare with the baby that looked like Sunny. He had asked the foreman's wife for milk. Troy angrily kicked a surprised Sunny with his knee. Tori yelled that she didn't want to see him for at least a week. Suddenly, Troy heard enthusiastic cheers. Someone said that Tori was really very strong. Troy turned to the source of the sound. The whole class stared at the girl with admiring eyes. Troy reproached himself for not being able to control his emotions. Tori went up to her girlfriends and asked her how she acted before. The girls wondered why she was doing that. Tori replied that it was interesting to see from the outside. Alice sat Tori down at her desk and began combing her tangled hair with a green comb. Tori squealed in pain. Alyssa asked why she had neglected her hair so much. It was starting to look worse. Tori said she should just cut her hair. Winnie revealed that Tori used to be afraid of even the dark and riding in the elevator. Julia happily added that before the incident, Tori loved to cook. Alice reported that the former Tori was very afraid of men. Winnie was very surprised. She had never heard of that. Troy wondered with amazement what Alice's words about Tori being panic-stricken by men could have meant. Alice said that the girl could not even look the young men in the eye. She could not even talk to them with great difficulty. Even in a chance encounter in the hallway, Tori tried to move as far away from male faces as possible, as if they were contagious. Finished with her work, Alice asked Tori to comb her hair right after her shower. Troy continued to ponder the girl's strange phobia. Alice sensed what her friend was thinking and placed a hand on her shoulder affectionately. She asked her not to fill her head with nonsense. Be that as it may, they all remain loyal friends of Tori. The girls cheerfully confirmed Alice's words. Sunny frowned at Tori. Troy was pleased. It meant that he was staying perfectly safe at school. Tori thanked the girls for their support. The whole school day had gone well on the whole, and Tori, accompanied by her father, returned to her cottage. Troy thought that the ordeal was only now beginning. Tori threw on an apron and began to work in the kitchen. She quickly and skillfully cut the vegetables into small slices. A puzzled Kane watched his sister through the transparent kitchen door and asked his father puzzledly what was going on. Frank didn't know. He told his son that Tori had bought some groceries right after school. Kane admitted that now he didn't understand Tori at all. Troy remembered Julia's words that Tori was kind and a good cook. He was not sure about kindness, but there were few people who could compare to him in terms of cooking. Finished with the cooking, Tori gleefully placed 6 different dishes on the table. Frank said enthusiastically that it looked delicious. Kane offered to bring stomach pills right away. Father refused. This time the food didn't look burnt as usual. Troy had no way of knowing that Tori liked to cook, but she wasn't very good at it. So he was surprised to see Frank and Kane's faces as they tasted the food. Kane suddenly realized that this food was much tastier than the food Tori had made before the accident. Frank was also amazed. Despite his worst expectations, the food turned out to be very good and healthy. He said cheerfully that the food was very good. Kane had to admit that the food was indeed excellent. Troy didn't understand the reason for Frank's laughter. Opening a bottle of wine, Frank asked why Tori had suddenly decided to make dinner. Troy realized that he had to take a chance. He decided to pretend that Tori was getting his memory back. Then he would be left alone. Tori said she was starting to remember things a little bit. Frank's hand shook and some wine spilled from the bottle onto the table. He seemed rather worried. Tori shifted her gaze to Kane. The young man was about to eat a piece of meat, but he couldn't hold his fork because of his excitement. Troy couldn't understand what was going on. After all, he'd actually tried and made a divine meal, and Kane and his father didn't seem happy about it. Kane worriedly asked Tori what exactly she remembered. Tori replied that she only remembered that she liked to cook. Frank quickly turned the conversation to another topic. Kane dutifully poured the wine into glasses, and Frank, smiling, proposed a toast to Tori's health. Troy was impressed. The young man had had no family since childhood, so the feeling of mental comfort was unfamiliar to him. Nevertheless, it was very pleasant to be at the same table with people who cared about you. It felt very warm in my soul. Troy realized that life was getting better and cheerfully raised his wine glass to his father's health, mistakenly almost calling him sir. Troy caught himself in time and tried to imagine Tori in his place. Of course she would wish her father's health, not sir's. 2 wine glasses clinked against Tori's glass, which was filled with fruit juice. Tori smiled happily. This event made Frank gloomy. He tried his best to hide his emotions and even tried to smile at his daughter. Kane, too, had noticed the discrepancy in the behavior of the girl they had known so well before, and Tori after being discharged from the clinic. After all, absolutely all the time Tori spent in that house, little Tori emphasized his position and called him sir. Looking over at Tori, who was drinking her juice completely unconcerned, Frank realized that for the first time in years, she had called him daddy. Frank was forced to take off his glasses from the excess of emotion. Tears came to his eyes. For so many years he had dreamed of Tori recognizing them as family. Night came on. It was very late and all the inhabitants of the house had gone to bed. There was no light in any window. The house seemed gray and gloomy. The phone suddenly rang in Kane's room, and the half-asleep young man was forced to turn on the light and answer it. Michelle reminded the young man that he had never contacted Tracy. Kane apologized and assured her that he would call him right away. At the same second, a man spoke into the phone instead of Michelle. Tracy said a polite hello and introduced himself to Kane. Kane began to apologize for dealing with domestic issues. He said that he wanted to call Tracy himself. The man on the other end of the phone smiled and said that everything was fine. The main thing was that they were in touch, and they would have a face-to-face meeting soon. At this time in their company's office, Michelle and Peter were frowning at each other. Tracy had paid them a visit with a dozen of his men and wanted to see Kane. Tracy informs Kane that he has tried to contact him repeatedly this month, but it's difficult, and that fact is frustrating to him. Kane expressed his sincere regrets. Tracy said there was no need to do that, it was fine, and offered to cut to the chase. The man said that he had gone to his company's office today. Unfortunately, Kane wasn't there, and Tracy realized that he was very busy. Tracy himself was nestled comfortably under the wall, while his thugs sullenly watched Michelle and Peter. Kane said he was very sorry about that. Tracy lazily said he shouldn't do that, and hinted at the possible breakdown of their continued cooperation. Tracy asked the young man to wait for a while. Kane tried to figure out how to get out of the awkward situation. He was surprised to hear Tracy ask to get him and his friends some drinks. Michelle asked if coffee would be good for him. As he escorted Michelle away with a look, Tracy told Kane that he had a rather attractive assistant and he was very jealous of the young man. The girl heard everything Tracy was saying and glared at him with resentment. She cursed Kane and prayed the day would be over sooner. Tracy laughed loudly and asked Kane to remind him where they left off. Kane turned black with anger. Troy was so angry with Tracy that he tossed and turned all night, but he couldn't sleep. Morning came. Tori had to get up early, because as a real girl, she had to be careful about her appearance. At 6 o'clock in the morning, she was up. It was unusual for Troy to get up so early. Taking the green comb, Tori began to comb her hair, yawning constantly. Troy grudgingly thought about the publicity stunts. Even after the miracle shampoos, you still have to comb your hair constantly. Tori combed her hair and walked over to her makeup table. She stood neatly on the table with her creams, blushes, lipsticks, and nail polish. The girl immediately remembered that Kane had rebuked her for her terrible sense of style and complete lack of makeup. Tori picked up the first lipstick she could find and began to look at it, trying on the best way to make up herself. Frank was in the middle of cooking. The man was in a good mood, and he was humming a little song to himself. Frank couldn't cook as much and taste it as Tori, so he limited himself to scrambled eggs. He sighed heavily as he remembered the dense dinner. Kane came out of his room, adjusting his jacket as he went. He heard Frank humming a song, so he looked over. The father had already set the table for the family. He explained that Tori had cooked dinner yesterday, and today he was paying her back. Frank realized that Kane was returning to the United States. He asked to see if Tori was awake and to call her in for breakfast. Kane looked at his father thoughtfully. He hadn't smiled since Mom's death. Tori jumped down from the second floor and shouted that she didn't have to do that, she was already here. My father wanted to say it was time for breakfast, but he hesitated. He and Kane had the same silent question on their faces. Tori had never looked this awful before. She misplaced her makeup and applied the blush too thickly. Kane asked what she'd done to her face. Halloween wasn't coming anytime soon. After breakfast, the three of them went to see Kane off at the airport. Frank and Kane were laughing the whole way, remembering Tori's funny face. Blushing with embarrassment, the girl asked her father if they had made fun of her enough. Frank apologized and explained that he couldn't help himself. He smiled and told Tori that she didn't really need makeup. She looked fine without it. Kane instructively said that she didn't need to put on makeup if she didn't know how. Troy was ready to tear her brother apart, since he was the reason everything had happened. Troy pretended to keep his eyes on the road and furtively glanced in the rearview mirror. There was clearly something wrong with his sister Tori. An offended Tori turned away from the window and pouted unhappily. She preferred not to look forward so she wouldn't have to meet Kane's gaze. Kane realized it at once and smiled faintly. Though Tori was the same in this, she'd been easily offended before. Meanwhile, in Japan, at a mountain temple dedicated to martial arts, a man couldn't stop chiding himself. Nakano stood in front of the meditation tablet. He hoped he could track down his rival Troy Ki, fight him, and redeem himself. It was the greatest shame to him that the young man remained undefeated as world champion, and Nakano didn't have time to find him. Behind him, tucking his legs under him, sat one of his brown-clad students. Flipping through something on his phone, he called out to the master. The young man was watching the very same video of Tori He and asked the teacher if wrestling without rules was really that strong of a discipline. Nakano turned to his student and asked him to remember once and for all that fighting without rules was not just a martial art. The master paused and looked intently at the young man with fiery red hair. He said that MMA represents a whole battle. The young man hesitated. He wanted to ask what sensei meant, but didn't dare, so he said he understood. One of the planes of a state-owned airline began its flight through a heavy downpour. Almost immediately, they announced boarding for a flight to the United States. Kane exclaimed that it was his flight and asked his father to take care of himself. Frank replied that Kane could use a little caution too. He gave his son a friendly pat on the back and asked him not to overburden himself, and to come home at the earliest opportunity. Troy was glad that Kane would be gone for a few days, and he could now live in peace. Tori couldn't help but giggle. Seeing that her father and Kane were immediately silent, Tori blushed and covered her mouth, hinting that she didn't mean anything bad. She exclaimed that she would miss her brother very much and asked him to come home soon. Kane looked at Tori with a frown. He gently stroked her hair and told her that she didn't need to be so over the top. His sudden display of affection made Tori very uncomfortable. Continuing to stroke Tori's head, Kane asked to obey his father in those moments when he couldn't watch her himself. Troy realized that Kane was trying to seem like a good big brother to his father. Tori promised that she would obey her father in everything. Suddenly, something happened. At that moment, Kane stood beside her and stroked her hair affectionately. Everything around her became completely different. The space in front of her eyes was a blur, and Kane was leaning over her. He looked to be in his early 20s, his face bloody. In that same second, Troy snapped back to reality. Kane was no longer around. Her father said her brother had already gone to board the plane. Troy tried to understand what had happened to him. Somehow he was sure that it was Tori's own memory. A large information board provided information about the nearest flights and terminal. as well as the nearest stores. A guy in black sportswear and a red jacket walked hurriedly through the airport building. A black bandage hid his face. On the way, he watched a video with Tori. Tori's voice sounded from the phone, and the boy promised himself that he would see her tomorrow. As the young man passed Tori, her father asked her if she wanted a snack. Tori replied that she was a little hungry. The voice sounded very familiar, and he turned around. When he compared Tori's face with the image on the video, he realized that he had already found his victim. He made a sharp turn and followed Frank and Tori. They were walking and talking as if nothing had happened. He looked at Tori carefully, trying to study her mannerisms and gait. The boy squinted his eyes as he began to hesitate. This girl looked more like a ballerina than a fighter, just an ordinary schoolgirl with long arms and legs. The mercenary couldn't understand how the battle-hardened Vice Captain Ox could lose to such a fragile girl. Unaware that she was being watched, Tori turned her face a few degrees and smiled. It hit the young man. He turned black with anger. The only logical explanation was that Tori had struck him with her beauty. The boy knew of Ox's lustfulness. Frank suggested that Tori come up the stairs with him since he needs to get around more on foot. The mercenary realized they weren't taking the elevator and decided it would look odd to drag the bag up the steps. He decided to go downstairs alone and then find them. Troy followed Frank thoughtfully, wondering if the vision was a memory of Tori's. Besides, it was unclear what had happened between them and why Kane was covered in blood. Thinking about all this, Tori stepped into the elevator with the young man. Frank saw that Tori had taken a wrong turn and called out to her in surprise. He didn't want to lose sight of his daughter for a second. Tori seemed to be just now coming to her senses and explained to her father that she had been thinking and had walked into the elevator completely by accident. The elevator door started to close, and Tori yelled to Frank that she would wait for him downstairs. He yelled that she didn't need to ride in the elevator. Through the narrow slit between the elevator doors, Frank shouted that she needed to get out immediately. Troy couldn't understand why he was panicking. Frank ran to the elevator and tried to hold the doors, but he was not in time and only touched the closed flaps. Tori stared in front of her with round eyes of surprise. The mercenary stood beside her with his traveling bag. Tori turned to him and smiled. She said that her father couldn't leave her unattended. The boy replied that he had the same mother. Suddenly, everything around her changed. Instead of an elevator, Tori found herself in an endless black space, and it was very scary. The young man in the red jacket was now barely visible through the fog. Tori's breathing became labored, and she almost fainted. The boy asked Tori in surprise what was wrong. Instead of answering, Tori huddled in a corner and clung to the rail. She continued to breathe heavily. Tori's face and neck were flushed. She was woefully short of breath. Troy couldn't understand what was happening. It was the first time it had happened. The shroud of mist began to change and transform into different visions. The first thing Troy saw was a faint reflection of his own face. Troy was very surprised. He had a strange feeling that he was seeing everything that was happening through Troy Key's own eyes. Moreover, Troy could see his body and his hands. It was all very strange and confusing. The young man couldn't understand what was happening. Troy was standing up to his heels in some kind of clear liquid and could look at the display of his face. The young man thought it was water. A child's voice called out to Daddy, begging him to open the door. Troy heard the voice and was surprised. Just a moment ago, he'd been here alone. Troy turned around and saw a little girl frantically drumming on the door. She was screaming and calling for her mommy. Voices were heard outside the door. A woman's voice asked to let the baby out. A man's voice said angrily that he was in trouble because of the two of them. Troy had no idea about that girl knocking on the door and assumed he was in hell. At this time, Frank was coming down the stairs as fast as he could. Age didn't allow him to move quickly, but today was a special occasion. Frank was sweating a little from the exertion, and his whole body was trembling from his legs. But time was of the essence. He must get down quickly. Grasping the railing, Frank tried to jump over one step and thus shorten his arrival time. Tori slumped exhaustedly to the elevator floor, her whole body trembling. She held her hands to the collar of her shirt as if she wanted to take it off. The guy couldn't understand what was going on with Tori. He assumed that Tori was suffocating because of her asthma and decided to help her. The mercenary crouched beside Tori, shivering in the corner, and asked if she needed help. Tori said nothing. The young man reached for the elevator control buttons and pressed one of the 3 buttons responsible for calling emergency services. He yelled to Tori that they were almost there and asked if the girl needed an ambulance. Suddenly, a new vision appeared in front of Troy. A huge tiger with red eyes appeared in front of the little girl, and she tried to chase it away. Troy Key couldn't figure out what it was. Having the outline of a tiger, the creature didn't look like a tiger or the ghost of a tiger. The girl put her hand on Tori's shoulder and demanded that she immediately calm down and pull herself together. They were almost there. Troy saw an angry tiger reaching out its clawed paw to the unfortunate little girl. He tried to understand what was causing these visions. Once above the little girl's head, The tiger's paw opened and was ready to tear her apart the next moment. At that moment, Tori seemed to wake up and swung her fist. Her eyes were very strange, white and pupilless. The mercenary in the red jacket tensed. He didn't know what was going on yet, but Tori was acting suspiciously. Troy ran up to the girl and picked her up with one hand, and with his free hand, he hit the tiger without looking. The youngster screamed and asked what was going on. Turns out, an unconscious Tori swung around and hit the guy who wanted to help her as hard as she could. The impact of the blow ripped the bandage from the boy's face. He stared at Tori in shock, not knowing what was happening. Tori's face was angry, her eyes cold and empty. The mercenary thought with horror that something was obviously wrong with Tori. Frank was in such a hurry to get downstairs that he even managed to get ahead of the elevator. He galloped to the elevator on the first floor. Breathing heavily, Frank shouted and called out to Tori. The elevator had just arrived, and the doors hadn't opened yet. Frank looked around. Tori was nowhere to be seen. He shouted into the elevator casement and asked if she was okay. Meanwhile, for Troy, the vision of the tiger had turned into a large bear. The little one squirmed in the corner. Troy ran up to the bear and brought his foot in for a kick. Tori jumped up from her seat and kicked the mercenary in the stomach with all her might. The young man didn't have time to block the blow. As the elevator doors opened, the mercenary flew out the door, nearly knocking a surprised Frank off his feet. Tori had just put her foot down. The boy got to his feet in a flash and shook himself off. A slight shiver ran through her body. The mercenary suspected that Tori was not as simple as she looked. Frank was used to seeing his girl sweet and gentle, and at the sight of such a fight, his glasses slid down his nose in surprise. Not immediately believing what was happening, Frank looked into the elevator. There was no one there but Tori, and the man realized that she had thrown the guy out of the elevator. Tori assumed a fighting stance and angrily asked the young man what was going on. Her empty eyes gave her the look of a demon. The mercenary said it was very painful. He had to admit that the victory over Ox was no accident. The mercenary stated that he hadn't intended to look for Tori until tomorrow, but that was no longer necessary now. The boy frowned. He was eager for immediate revenge and demanded fiercely that Tori come out to fight him right now. The mercenary was determined. He instantly threw off his red jacket and backpack and tossed them aside. The young man assumed a fighting stance and looked at Tori with a frown. He waved his hand at her impatiently, suggesting that she attack him. Frank stared at the young man in astonishment. Tori came out of the elevator, not hiding her hostile emotions, her face burning with hatred. Frank shifted his gaze to his daughter. The man had never seen her so embittered before, and it confused him. Tori walked slowly to the underground parking lot and stopped in front of the mercenary. It was a mystery to Frank what had happened between them. The mercenary beckoned Tori over to him and asked him to show him his real fighting skills. He was sure he could handle her. At that moment, it seemed to Troy that that huge bear was trying to speak to him in its own language, and he was very surprised. Troy told the bear that he was in a very strange dream. Troy did not understand what the bear wanted, so he decided that he would be happy to deal with him. There was another reason for that. He hadn't fought in his physical body in a very long time, and here he was, clearly feeling it. The mercenary had been watching Tori closely and so couldn't believe his eyes when she simply disappeared as if she wasn't even there. The mercenary's eyebrows arched in surprise. He knew it was simply impossible to just disappear into nothing. At the same second, Tori's knee nearly broke his nose. Only years of practiced reaction saved the young man. The mercenary had time to make a block. The young man was surprised to think that Tori seemed to jump out of nowhere, and with incredible speed, and in a leap hit him with her knee. He remembered Nakano's mentor and frowned, thinking that his sensei could only lose to such a technique. Frank couldn't believe his daughter was capable of such a thing. He screamed in panic and begged the girl to stop. The girl hit the mercenary with her knee again and hit the block. At the same second, she swung her fist in flight. Troy saw it completely differently. It was as if he were fighting a humanoid bear that was blocking his blows in time. Troy smiled. He was liking this fight more and more. The bear was clearly as strong as Troy, and he was fun to fight. The mercenary missed a hard blow and flew off onto the hood of a nearby car. It was quite unexpected for him. As he flew into the windshield, the mercenary thought for the first time that Tori was fighting too well for a high school girl. Frank was worried that his daughter's amusement would cost him too much and asked her to stop immediately. Tori didn't seem to hear her father. She was so engrossed in the battle with the mercenary that she didn't see anything around her. She jumped up and swung her knee. The mercenary quickly calculated her possible movements and thought he could easily dodge the girl's attack and then throw her back. At first, everything went well according to the plan. At the right moment, the young man ducked, evading the attack, and decided that he would counterattack now. He never managed to hit the girl. At the same moment, the mercenary froze and couldn't bring himself to pick himself up off the floor. He stared with surprised eyes. Tori unwittingly saved her position by being in her school skirt. and the mercenary's fantasy played out. He couldn't endure such a tempting view from his fighting position and fell to the ground. The blood was gushing from his nostrils. Now it was Troy Chi's turn to be surprised. He stared astonished at his powerful enemy who was lying on the ground. Blood was gushing from his nose. Troy shouted at the bear with annoyance that there was no point in playing dead beforehand. He didn't even have time to hit it. The mercenary began to recover little by little. He was a little hurt that Tori had used such a sneaky trick against him. Wiping his nose, the mercenary firmly decided that he would no longer be ceremonious with Tori and would make her pay her bills. He remembered the sensei who had stood at the large cloth in their temple. That inscription had urged him to cool his anger, and the mercenary closed his eyes, following the rule. Tori looked at her opponent indignantly. Something was wrong, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. Right in front of Troy's eyes, the bear began to dissolve into thin air. Troy was surprised to think that the enemy was frightened and decided to run away. Troy smiled and asked the bear not to leave. He would like to play with the bear some more, since they were barely warmed up. The mercenary had just finished his meditation procedure and felt it was now safe to continue the battle. He opened his eyes. Startled, Troy saw that the huge bear had grown right in front of him and was reaching out with huge clawed paws. It looked different for the mercenary. He was strong enough to run up quickly and grab Tori by the shoulders. Frank shouted fearfully that the young man should leave his daughter alone immediately. He had no right to maim her. The mercenary had a firm grip on Tori's clothes. He saw and heard nothing but Tori now. She was the priority target. The girl tried to break free, and the mercenary fell to the floor of the parking lot, dragging Tori with him. At the same time, the young man kicked her in the stomach. With his back on the ground, the bear quickly let go of Troy, and the young man was surprised to realize he was flying through the air, tumbling along the way. He hit the cement pavement with a clatter and grunted in frustration. Troy hadn't realized the bear had judo skills. Seeing his daughter falling to the ground, Frank rushed fearfully to her, shouting her name as he went. The mercenary frowned at the girl. The young man even regretted a little that he had done such a cruel thing to Tori. She was a girl after all, and he had thrown her onto the cement pavement. Troy flipped once more in flight and was now in full control of his muscular body. He grinned. The reception wasn't bad. When it was only a little distance to the ground, Tori suddenly put out her arms. Her body jumped back as if it were rubber, and in a second she was on her feet. The mercenary was amazed at Tori's ability to twist his body instantly. He had not seen such flexibility in his opponents for a long time. Now the mercenary no longer regretted his action. With Tori's strength, there was no need to worry about her health. Troy knelt down and praised the bear. He asked for a demonstration of what other techniques a fighting bear could do. Frank stepped closer and asked the mercenary and his daughter to stop this outrage immediately. He didn't want to watch Tori fight. At this moment, a large black armored car flew into the underground parking lot at a tremendous speed with a roar. As the opponents stood just off center line, the headlights shone into Tori's back. Frank shouted that she needed to get out of the way immediately. Troy looked away from the bear and started to turn around. He was confused by the very bright light that had appeared suddenly. The headlights were now shining right in his face, and Troy began imperceptibly transforming into Tori and losing his physical body again. The mercenary and Tori stared in surprise at the fast-approaching car. The girl froze in place, as if she didn't realize the danger. Troy looked at Tori's arms and body in surprise. He didn't want to believe it was over so quickly, and he was back in her body. It was so unexpected that Tori considered her hands, and didn't even notice the radiator of the huge car ready to sweep her under. Frank shouted fearfully that the car wasn't stopping and asked Tori to get out of the way. Even the mercenary warned her of the danger. The mercenary jumped straight at Tori, wrapping both arms around her and pulling her to the side. The car roared past. Frank's heart nearly jumped out. Tori was acting like a stupid girl, and the driver didn't even think about stopping. The driver was so engrossed in watching the video that he didn't look at the road. He already knew the parking lot like the back of his hand. The mercenary was very indignant to the extreme. Of course he wanted to massacre this girl, but trying to run her down with an armored car was too harsh. Troy himself was so amazed at his reverse transformation into Tori that he paid no attention to anything and stared in wonder at the girl's hands. Meanwhile, Kane had taken a charter flight to the United States. He was proudly wearing the colors of a government airline. The stewardess uncorked the bottle and poured red wine into the young man's glass. It poured gently through the chute in the neck of the tube. The girl asked Kane how he finds the food. The young man replied that the food was very good. The stewardess was satisfied with his answer. The girl placed a tray with a large cupcake in a special notch near the window. She said that their company could offer other desserts to choose from. Kane expertly took a small sip and replied to the stewardess that he would eat a little later. The girl bowed gracefully and left. The young man again gave himself up to reminiscence. Several years had passed since that memorable day when the woman and the girl had rushed into his life. Tori had grown a little older and felt more confident in the house. She stood at the stove and baked little cupcakes like this one. She smelled really good. She carried a tray of muffins to the table, her eyes beaming with delight. She liked to make her own food. Kane was leafing through his magazine on the couch. The girl's mother said she was getting better at it, so she decided to try it first. She took the cupcake and took a bite. It quickly melted in her mouth, and Tori stared at her mother, waiting for an answer. The woman said her cupcakes were still too sweet, but this was much better. Kane couldn't hear them. His ears were busy with the headphones. At that moment, the head of the family entered the house and asked what they were doing. The woman replied that she was teaching Tori the art of home baking. Frank came closer and said cheerfully that baking cupcakes was a good idea. He really likes cupcakes himself. He walked closer and asked little Tori if he could have one of the cupcakes. The girl immediately hid behind her mother's back. Frank took a bite and exclaimed that it was just wonderful. The woman said she thought it was too sweet. Frank ate the cupcake with obvious enjoyment, and Tori was pleased to see that. The woman replied that the girl had been making them for a long time. Tori rushed to the table. There were still 2 cupcakes on the tray, one for each member of the family. Frank and Mom watched her. Taking the best cupcake in her hands, Tori ran up to her brother and timidly offered him a taste of the cupcake. Kane was still lying on the couch. Frank and the woman looked at each other tenderly. It was important to both of them that their children get along quickly. Kane saw Tori coming toward him with the cupcake and slammed his magazine shut loudly. The girl froze in place, startled. Frank yelled at Kane. He didn't like this behavior from his son. The woman said it was okay. Kane said glumly that he had to go. The girl stood resentfully in the middle of the room with a cupcake in her hand. She was trying hard, trying to please everyone. Frank asked his son where he was going this time and tried to stop him. Kane didn't think about going back. The city was waiting for him. His best friends were bikers and roared through the streets. Kane had his own motorcycle, and Frank would do anything for his son. Kane raced through the city at the head of the column. He loved that intoxicating feeling when the wind tries to throw you off the saddle. On one of the streets in the center of the city, the young man spotted something interesting from afar and added speed. It was his prey. 3 kids were standing in the street with an expensive handheld console. One of them begged the owner to let him play. Kane rolled a little closer to the guys, reaching out to them, and all the other bikers laughed gloatingly. The bikers flanked the school children. Kane asked the boys to come closer to him. The owner of the gadget asked fearfully what he wanted. Kane replied sullenly that he was driving by and suggested that they might be friends with him. The boys drew back fearfully. Kane hadn't been home all day. He came home late and the lights were out all over the house. The sky was gloomy and the moon was hiding behind the clouds. All 3 family members were long since asleep, and Kane could undress and go to bed unhindered without answering stupid questions. He placed the selected console on the living room table, only now noticing that the girl had still left him a cupcake and placed it on his own drawing. The drawing had been scrawled on it that the cupcake was meant for him, and Kane's heart fluttered. A warmth came into his eyes. He picked up the cupcake and found a smaller inscription underneath. In the corner of the drawing, Tori called him her big brother. Kane decided to try the cupcake after all. The girl had worked so hard for a reason, especially since no one was watching. Chewing on a bite of dessert, Kane told himself that this cupcake just tasted disgusting. The girl doesn't know how to bake them. Everything that had happened yesterday had been very strange and dreamlike. Troy tried to reconstruct the order of events. It had started with a dark room. Then, as if out of nowhere, a little girl appeared. She was bawling and screaming incessantly and calling for help from her parents. Troy found himself up to his heels in water. It was a very strange dark room, and he couldn't figure out what it meant. Then a huge humanoid bear appeared out of nowhere. It seemed ghostly, but at the same time it had a physical essence. Troy remembered swinging his fist at the bear and hitting it angrily. The whole of their fight came back to mind, and then the bear deftly grabbed him and threw him across. And Troy was surprised to realize that the bear had fighting skills. Troy threw his fist with bloody knuckles as hard as he could toward the battle bear. Suddenly, he realized he was in bed. Tori was under the covers, waving her fists fiercely as if she were fighting a ghost. Troy looked around perplexed. This room was unfamiliar to him, and he didn't remember coming here. Besides, the strange dream was bothering him. Nevertheless, sleep was no longer an option. Troy reluctantly got out of bed, stretched, and went to wash his face. Troy looked in the mirror at Tori's angry reflection and concluded that it was her own memories. Given that her past was very blurry, as if in a fog, Troy figured that Tori's body just didn't want to remember it. He remembered that it was very dark and damp in that place. The voices outside the door were most likely those of the girl's parents. Troy threw the blouse off Tori's body and decided that the girl had been locked in a closet or some kind of closet when she was a baby. Now it was clear why her father avoided the elevator and made Tori use the stairs or escalator. It was also unclear where the bear had come from in Tori's memories. Troy assumed that another trauma had something to do with it. Suddenly, Troy realized everything. The fact that all of Tori's mental traumas had been inflicted on her as a little girl was not a good conclusion. As a child, her father had disliked the girl and abused her in every way possible. Troy couldn't believe it. It was just awful. Troy found an injured spot on his neck and wrinkled his nose in pain. He remembered that he had fought in his physical body at some point. Troy tried to move his shoulder. His whole body ached, and it was amazing that Tori's body could withstand such a fight. Suddenly he saw the bloody knuckles on Tori's hand and wondered. He frowned, remembering where they had come from. At that moment in the elevator, Tori felt as if she didn't belong and punched the mercenary. If he hadn't ducked, she might have broken her arm. Troy remembered the bear he'd fought and realized that it was the same guy from the elevator that Tori had fought later. That guy was quite strong and had good skills. Troy recognized that the mercenary was as good as his physical body. The doctor examined the young man and said that some girl was taking care of him. The mercenary thought angrily that some girl had tried to beat him up. The young man had many abrasions and bruises on his arms. The doctor said that he had not seen such wounds for a long time, and assumed that the young man had met a strong opponent. The man replied glumly that he had not seen such a strong opponent for a long time. The doctor hoped that the young man would win next time. The boy looked at the doctor perplexed. The man had misunderstood him. He hadn't lost that fight. The young man angrily exclaimed that he had not lost at all. The doctor said he owed $250 and offered to pay the bill by card or cash. Some girl asked in amazement who it was that had managed to defeat the bear. The doctor exclaimed that his daughter had come home. It was the same girl with blue clothes and light blue hair. She clarified who the opponent was. The bear replied that she already knew. The girl smiled faintly and assumed it was Tori. No one else in the neighborhood would dare to challenge him. Bear replied angrily, clenching his teeth that the girl had hit the mark. Besides Tori, there were no other contenders. A new day was beginning. The sun rose higher and higher, penetrating every window of the Yi family's house with its rays. Tori barely managed to get down from the second floor. Her whole body was very sore after yesterday's fight, and she held her back. When he heard Tori's footsteps, Frank came out of the kitchen and happily announced that breakfast was almost ready. It was good news. At least I wouldn't have to stand at the stove. Troy looked intently at Tori's father. Frank looked very friendly and was smiling. He was wearing an apron over his shirt. Troy could not find anything suspicious. Tori's father did not show his negative emotions at the sight of the girl. A few minutes later, Frank served the food on the table. Tori almost exclaimed with delight. It was her favorite deep-fried noodles. Tori immediately pounced on the food as if she hadn't eaten anything in 3 days, and began sucking in the pasta with gusto. He and his father were sitting on the couch, and Tori said it was delicious, and he could very well open his own restaurant. Frank stated that he had once started out selling noodles at a stall, too. Tori was surprised. She had never heard of it. It was hard back then, her and Kane's mom having to get up before dawn. But still, the three of them were happy. Tori asked in surprise where she herself was then, and suggested that she hadn't been born yet. The unexpected question took Frank by surprise. He choked on his food and started coughing. He couldn't say a word. Tori asked worriedly how he was feeling. Frank continued to cough, and Tori looked at her father's plate in surprise. He had already eaten his portion and couldn't choke on it. The girl noticed that one of Frank's pant legs looked a little thicker than the other. That was odd. Tori looked down. The girl's eyes almost went up to her forehead in surprise. Now she realized why she had thought that. Her father's leg under his pant leg was carefully bandaged from foot to knee, and Tori asked what had happened to his leg. Continuing to cough, Frank replied that he had twisted it while running up the stairs and it wasn't really a big deal. Troy recalled that the girl's father had never inquired about Tori's strange behavior in the parking lot yesterday. The girl told her father that she felt very sick in the elevator and did not remember everything else. She asked her father about possible causes. Frank remained silent. He had to find a way to tell an acceptable part of the truth. The man took his time wiping his lips with a napkin. Tori got tired of waiting and impatiently said she asked a question. Frank really didn't want to bring it up. He sighed heavily and informed his daughter that she had actually suffered from a fear of confined spaces since childhood. Troy's hunch was confirmed. It turned out that Tori was claustrophobic. Tori looked at her father incredulously. Frank explained that confined places like an elevator lead to chest pains and unconsciousness, and they usually avoid such places. The man said she was very lucky. The guy had saved her, and she should be sure to thank him if she had the chance. Troy got angry. Frank left out the main point. Tori asked under what circumstances she'd developed claustrophobia. Frank said that Tori was very lucky. She was able to forget the circumstances in which her feelings had caused her claustrophobia. The man said it would be best not to bring it up, and smiled affectionately. Troy thought about it. It looked suspicious. Tori frowned. On the one hand, it was as if he was worried about his daughter. But on the other hand, Frank was clearly not telling her the truth. Troy looked thoughtfully at the empty plate and Frank's suspicious smile. Perhaps Tori's father felt guilty toward her. Meanwhile, Kane arrived at his office located on the oceanfront in the United States. Michelle revealed that she met with Tracy's people no matter what, and she doubts that they are worth cooperating with. Peter stated that Michelle had misunderstood Tracy's bodyguards. The girl recalled that Peter had been scared to death himself. Peter explained that it was just business. Michelle replied that she didn't like it, and Peter bluntly implied that no one was interested in her opinion. Peter smirked and turned to Kane. He asked Riley what the boss had to say on the matter. Kane had not uttered a word up to this point. He stood silently by the window. The young man put a cigarette in his teeth and flicked on his lighter. Kane took a drag and turned to Michelle. The young man assured that the assistant shouldn't worry about business. He would talk to Tracy himself. Michelle turned to him fearfully. She was worried about Kane. Peter grinned and said that Kane's promise was very reassuring. Who better than Peter to know that all those guys are ruthless gangsters, and Kane wouldn't survive a meeting with them. That same evening, Tracy's full team was having an active night out at one of the best nightclubs on the coast. Today was a special occasion for celebration. Peter sat opposite Tracy. The champagne was flowing and they raised their glasses. Peter took a sip of the glass and was instantly intoxicated. The drink was the most exquisite he had ever tasted. He raised his glass of unfinished champagne and exclaimed that it was the most excellent champagne in the world. Tracy said softly that it was just ordinary sparkling wine, and the drink seemed tastier only because he was in a good mood. Tracy took a taste of the wine and said that the drink would taste disgusting if Peter was in a bad mood. Peter smiled and sipped some more. He told me that Kane was trying to be cool and it was a pleasure to watch. Kane's voice came from behind him. He said it was worth a drink in that case. Peter choked, recognizing the voice immediately. Peter almost spilled his wine out of fear. Stammering, he asked Kane what he wanted here. Peter couldn't figure out when Kane had gotten here. Kane reminded the shareholder that he was going to talk to Mr. Tracy in person, and he must have forgotten about it. Peter said fearfully that Kane's plane had only recently landed and he should rest. He caught himself giving away his fear. Kane replied that it wasn't a big deal right now. He asked what had scared Peter so much. The bartender and the people at the bar began to listen to their conversation. Kane said contemptuously that Peter was just a weakling and couldn't call himself a real rebel. Tracy's men turned to their interlocutors. Kane bent closer to Peter and firmly stated that he knew about all of his questionable dealings. He exclaimed that Peter had betrayed the company. Several of Tracy's men immediately approached the young man with a threatening look. The largest man told Kane that he'd better keep his mouth shut. The young man frowned at him and assessed the threat. Peter turned pale. He realized that there was going to be quite a fight, and he was beginning to regret that he was in the middle of it. Something exciting was about to happen at the nightclub owned by Tracy's syndicate. Peter was starting to feel the glory coming, but then Kane showed up. The thugs were very unhappy with Kane's behavior, and the largest of them was just about to tell the young man what was wrong. Peter smelled the stench of flesh and paled. He didn't want to be in the middle of a fight. Tracy himself decided not to bring the matter to a conflict. He opened the champagne and said that they were not going to meet until tomorrow. The bodyguards began to disperse little by little, and only one, the largest, remained behind Kane's back. Tracy smiled and said that Kane was very impatient, even more so than he was. He handed the young man a glass of drink. Kane sullenly said that he had wasted too much of his time because of his business, so he wasn't going to procrastinate any longer. Peter looked at Kane with hatred. He cursed his impatience for one day wouldn't make any difference. Tracy called out to Peter and suggested that they all raise their glasses together. Peter turned around and decided to support the toast. In fact, Peter was beginning to suspect Tracy of knowing about Kane's arrival and deciding to get rid of him through someone else's hands. On the other hand, Peter didn't know if he was right in his assumption. The only thing that was obvious was that the flavor of the wine had indeed changed for the worse. Kane had no time to drink alcoholic beverages. He had come on business. The young man put his glass on the table after a few drinks. Tracy had warmed up with drinks and was quite hot, so he unbuttoned his jacket and enjoyed the wine. Kane stared at Tracy and reminded her that he'd come here on business, so it would be good to talk business. Tracy laughed. He said he'd heard about Kane's courage, and the rumors were true. The young man hadn't disappointed him. Tracy said he was interested in Kane's shipping lanes between the US and China, as well as the construction company's commercial rights. Peter turned pale. In his conversation with Peter, Tracy had said that he was going to make him his partner, and so Peter had gone over to his side. Peter tried to hint to Tracy that they were talking about something completely different. Tracy explained that he didn't need an intermediary. Tracy smiled and asked Kane if he would be willing to transfer the rights of his companies for an impressive fee. Peter figured that Kane would have to agree, or he simply wouldn't get out of the country alive. Kane refused at once. Peter thought indignantly that Kane was going to get him in trouble now too. Tracy said that Kane was just messing with him because he hadn't even considered his lucrative offer. Kane frowned, saying that he wasn't going to spend the rest of his life rotting in jail since Tracy was using his ports and company to supply and sell contraband. Tracy stared at Kane. The young man understood at once why Tracy wanted to take over his business. Peter still couldn't believe that Kane had turned down such a mutually beneficial deal, and now a bad fate awaited them both. Tracy laughed and said that Kane seemed like a smart man, and he was offering some pretty good terms. Kane stated that he couldn't accept them. Kane laughed and said he was sorry. He sincerely hoped it wouldn't come to that today. Bodyguards were lined up behind the guests. They were ready to wring their necks at the snap of a finger. Peter peered carefully over the back of the chair and saw that all of Tracy's men were gathered here. He decided that Kane was just an inconsiderate idiot. Kane slowly rose from his chair and stated to Tracy that he was wearing a very expensive suit and acting like he had a legitimate business. Rising to his full height, Kane smiled at Tracy and added that that was the reason Tracy wouldn't be able to kill him. Peter was simply stunned. In all the years he had worked with Kane, he had never once seen him with a smile on his face. Kane turned around and approached the bulky man. He asked him politely to step back. The bodyguard frowned, wondering if it was a threat. Kane hummed and stared contemptuously at the bulky man, as if he was facing a little girl who couldn't do any harm. Kane immediately furrowed his eyebrows and glared angrily at the bodyguard. Kane's gaze was full of self-confidence. He'd seen that blank stare many times before, and he knew well what to expect from Kane. But this time he felt the animal fear himself. The man couldn't look Kane in his icy eyes any longer and turned away. The others waited for their boss's orders. Tracy raised his hand and gestured for his team to let Kane out. He's not going anywhere, he'll sign all the papers. Peter sat shaking with fear in his chair. Kane had scared him very badly. However, Peter thought that Kane was only playing his part. Tracy had to admit that Kane was not an easy man to deal with, and the rumors of his exploits were indeed true. The next day, a special meeting of the board of directors was called at Kane's company. Kane glanced glumly around at everyone present and asked if anyone could explain what the reason for the urgent meeting was. Mr. Smith extended his hand and stated that everyone is in agreement with the partnership terms that Mr. Tracy proposed. All the participants murmured. One man just nodded. The woman said that they had already discussed everything. The second man also expressed his agreement. Peter smirked. He knew that all the board members were either bribed or intimidated, and Kane had no choice. Kane remembered that scene of saying goodbye to his father. Frank had asked him to be careful what he did. Kane closed his eyes. He had thought it over, and he wasn't going to back down. Kane opened his eyes resolutely and looked at the meeting participants. He said he understands their positions perfectly well, but has no intention of giving his business to anyone, no matter how much they threaten him. At this time in China, Tori was walking leisurely through the city, looking at all those buildings and trees that were only visible from the car window. The girl was enjoying her walk, and so it seemed to her that the air was very fresh. She came to the conclusion that freedom smelled just like that. In the morning, she argued with Frank and told him she was no longer a child and would be going to school on her own. She promised to call if she needed to. Troy had his own considerations. He suspected that Frank was the cause of Tori's injuries and needed to keep his distance. There were quite a few schoolchildren at the bus stop, and they began to make their way onto the bus. Tori grumbled unhappily. The bus traveled quickly through the city, as the distance between stops was decent and the traffic was not very dense. The bus was so densely packed with people that it was impossible to hold onto the handrails. The loudspeaker shouted that we should give seats to those who needed them. Tori almost choked in the crush. She was starting to think about taking the car to school like she used to. Troy thought about becoming more sensitive to small spaces, and attributed it to the girl's small stature. Besides, Tori's good looks were clearly not suited to the cramped public transportation. Tori blushed at the thought. Troy figured there couldn't be that many perverts around to molest Tori, and he was just winding himself up for nothing. Suddenly, Tori felt someone from behind touch her body and her face took on a crimson hue. She couldn't believe that the guy next to her was letting his hands loose and touching her, because it was very disgusting and repulsive. She tried to reassure herself that the bus was just crowded, and that's why that guy did it by accident. Suddenly, Tori felt it happen again. The young man was touching her buttocks with the back of his hand. Tori turned red with anger. She knew now that the boy had done it on purpose, and she was ready to kill him right there. The girl immediately turned to the young man and shouted to the whole bus that she would kill him if he ever touched her again. The whole bus turned its eyes to them at once. Suddenly, something strange happened to Tori again. This time, everything around her was not black, but light purple. Two silhouettes were visible in the haze of the fog. They were discussing among themselves their new victim and the fact that she was very rich, in all likelihood. The first young man said hello to Kane, and the second said cheerfully that today was something new. They had fresh meat. Kane then lightning-fast removed his motorcycle helmet and beat those two young men unconscious. Some woman on the bus called out to Tori The bus was already empty, but the girl didn't notice it. She sat on a chair and cried. Some girl told Tori not to worry. The police had already taken that guy away. Troy couldn't understand where Tori's memories had gone. Tori got off the bus. A woman shouted after her that they could take her to the hospital. Tori replied that her school was very close by. Troy kept wondering if this was another memory of the girl. For some reason, only dramatic memories came to him. He couldn't understand why those memories were even coming into his mind. Troy connected it to the guy the police had taken away. Troy still felt awful in Tori's body, having been molested recently. He had an idea that was worth checking out. Since the bad memories were triggered by sexual harassment, it could mean that Tori was victimized at the time. It became very hard for Tori to breathe, and she stopped. Tears came to her eyes from the intense pain. The pain was coming from her stomach. For some unknown reason, it hurt so badly that Tori bent a little to deal with it. Suddenly, Tori felt a thin stream of liquid slowly dripping down her skirt. Tori had never been so ashamed before. She was ready to fall to the ground so that no one would witness her shame. The girl squatted in the middle of the sidewalk, and all the pedestrians passing by looked back at Tori suspiciously. Troy seriously panicked. All he realized was that it was some kind of liquid, and he assumed it was urine. A sudden hunch dawned on Troy. He reluctantly assumed that Tori's body had begun its critical days. At the mere thought of it, Tori's body began to tremble. Troy panicked. He'd completely forgotten that he had to take care of that, too. He began to reassure himself that it wouldn't last forever, and it wouldn't take much at all. You should just go to the store and buy a hygiene item. Still, Troy couldn't bring himself to get up. The blood kept coming, and there were a lot of people around, and he felt ashamed. Suddenly, someone called out to Tori. The girl slammed her eyes shut in surprise. Perhaps this was an escape from shame. It turned out to be the same girl in blue attire from the gym. It was simply impossible to mistake her for anyone else. Tori raised a tear-stained face to her rescuer and whispered confusedly, stammering that she was having those very days. The girl was a little embarrassed by that statement. It was a little strange, but she couldn't leave Tori here alone.